Chapter 634. Huangfu Feiyu couldn't understand the meaning of the 13th floor, but in fact it didn't matter anymore. 13 exquisite and perfect small swords surrounded Li Tianlan in the center. The sword light flickered and the sword intent rose and fell. This was the most perfect sword formation Huangfu Feiyu had ever seen in his life. It was also the most incredible sword formation he had ever seen. It was so pure that it was a whole. Strictly speaking, when Li Tianlan stood in the sword formation, he was not a part of it. Instead, he was the target that the sword formation automatically revolved around. There was no sign of anyone controlling the so-called 13-story building. It was natural and natural. The 13th floor, Huangfu Feiyu muttered to himself. The 13th floor. He had been the vice commander of the Beihai Corps for nearly 30 years and had never been afraid of anything. But at this moment, in the face of such a sword formation and Li Tianlan, he experienced real fear and even despair for the first time in his heart. The sword formation and Li Tianlan were so perfectly integrated that there was no flaw or weakness at all. "What is the 13th floor?" he asked again, unwilling to give up. Li Tianlan didn't answer. In fact, he couldn't answer this question either. The 13th floor was Xianyuan Feng, swordsmanship, sword formation and unique skills. It was everything and it was nothing. It was the supreme power. In a sense, it was everything of that heavenly sun. The sword light surrounded him and different sword energy intertwined and spread. The divided Xianyuan Feng tried to show off everything about the 13th floor. Li Tianlan suddenly laughed. His eyes were calm and incomparably cold. No matter what the 13th pagoda was at this very moment, everything here belonged to him. Li Tianlan reached out his hand. The 13th floor rotated slowly, and a warm flowing light automatically appeared in front of him. This was an extremely exquisite small sword. The blade was only the size of a finger and it was slowly rotating. However, the engraved patterns were exceptionally clear. The hilt, the blade, and every line was sharp and dense. A subtle light flowed on the blade, and it had the color of the setting sun. 2 delicate but sharp small characters were engraved on the blade. This might be a story of the past, but at this moment it was just a name. The name of this sword. This sword was called Tianguang. Tianguang obediently fell into Li Tianlan's hands. Li Tianlan flicked his finger. In an instant, an incomparably dazzling light burst out from his hand. Tianguang's sword began to elongate, rising with the most brilliant colors between heaven and earth. Endless sword energy slowly rotated around Li Tianlan. Huangfu Feiyu gave up the last bit of hope in his heart. Li Tianlan's every move was very slow. But each and every one of his actions represented his attitude. He would not compromise. The Huangfu family could only fight to the death. All the uneasiness, apprehension, powerlessness, and despair were forcibly suppressed by him. The demons on his left and right stepped forward at the same time. Huangfu Feiyu raised his palm and roared at the top of his lungs, "Famous general, kill!" The surging light screen lit up the instant the roar resounded through the sky. The wind and rain were messy. The gloomy sky became extremely bright in an instant. The entire Lingtai mountain was filled with streaks of cold radiance. Those were streaks of sword radiance. Countless figures dashed out from all corners of the mountain. Sword lights shot out, flames and thunder rumbled at the same time. Large patches of light and shadows occupied every corner of the Lingtai mountain. It was a huge crowd. Countless streaks of sword light rushed toward Li Tianlan at the same time. The Tianguang sword had become a slender sword with a blade nearly 2 meters long. Amidst the countless flashes of light and shadows, Tianguang's brilliance grew brighter. It was the color of the setting sun, and the whole world became a dim yellow against the light. Li Tianlan held the hilt of the sword. Tianguang was in his hand. The other 12 swords shook at the same time. Li Tianlan disappeared on the spot. The dim yellow light spread all the way in the direction where he disappeared. In an instant, Li Tianlan directly crossed a distance of hundreds of meters and appeared in the crowd. He did not care about Huangfu Feiyu or even the 2 demons. At this moment, the surrounding sky seemed to fall completely silent. Only the warm yellow light became the only vivid sword light. The sword light tore through all the killing intent and flashed in the crowd for a moment. Li Tianlan's figure flashed and disappeared. A large amount of blood suddenly burst out, dyeing the surrounding vegetation red and solidifying with the cold rain. Tianguang kept flashing. The 12 swords kept changing positions around Li Tianlan, and the whole sword formation was spinning wildly. Before a large amount of blood could fall to the ground, Li Tianlan's figure had already appeared in another direction. The nearly 2-meter-long blade swept through the forest, including the thick trees, the solid boulders, and the strong bodies. Everything along the way was directly cut into pieces in an instant. The whole Ling Tai mountain instantly became a real purgatory. Only Li Tianlan's figure kept flashing. Huang Fu Feiyu finally came to his senses. Everything around him did not freeze. It was because Li Tianlan was fast, too fast. That incredible speed gave everyone the illusion that the world had completely frozen. Wherever the blade passed, the most powerful elite troops of the Huangfu family were completely a pile of weeds under the blade. Gather! Huangfu Feiyu's loud voice rang out on the Ling Tai mountain. At the same time, the two demons began to charge at full speed. The troops of the famous generals scattered on the Ling Tai mountain, forming a sword formation that covered the mountains and fields. Once the sword formation moved, the soaring sword light could completely cover every corner of the Ling Tai mountain. However, Li Tianlan was too fast. He was so fast that the elites of the famous generals had no time to react. Under such circumstances, they could only gather. Huangfu Feiyu also rushed forward. As long as the two demons could hold Li Tianlan back for a while. In 10 seconds or even 5 or 6 seconds, the famous generals would finish gathering. Then he could use himself as the core of the sword formation and borrow all the sword intent of the famous generals to fight Li Tianlan with all his might. All the elites of the famous generals began to retreat and gather. Blood fell from the sky. Li Tianlan, whose eyes were already red, suddenly let go of Tianguang. The 13 swords spun wildly around him. Tianguang appeared in the most suitable position in an instant. Li Tianlan's palm suddenly covered the sword formation and grabbed it hard. Crack! With a crisp sound, the 13 exquisite small swords suddenly collided with each other. Colorful light burst out around him. The huge Xianyuan blade appeared in Li Tianlan's hand again. Li Tianlan's figure appeared in the sky. All the elites of the famous generals were still retreating. The pitch-black giant sword split the space in the sky. Li Tianlan held the sword with both hands and slashed it down hard. Boom! A large piece of space exploded. The sound waves were as violent as thunder. The entire Ling Tai mountain seemed to shake violently for a moment. There was a visible air wave in the middle of the battlefield. The transparent air wave swept across the battlefield. Broken tree trunks, broken boulders, messy leaves, flowing blood and flying soil. Everything was blown up by the sword. Xianyuan blade froze in the air, looking extremely majestic. The transparent air wave swept across the famous general's troops. There was the sound of countless long swords being unsheathed. In the sudden scream, the bright long swords suddenly broke free from the control of the famous general's elite and rushed into the sky. At the same time, they cut off his arm. Sword lights kept flying up, specific to each person and each sword. All the long swords of the famous general's troops rushed into the sky. There were so many of them that they covered the sky. The surging air wave spread to a range of 100 meters and rushed forward for a while. The air wave kept shaking and finally turned into a field of nearly 100 meters. Countless swords danced wildly in the air. With broken tree trunks and boulders, all the famous general's troops were trapped inside. Li Tianlan stood high in the sky and watched all this. His eyes were calm and emotionless. At this moment, 100 meters below him was all Xianyuan Blade's field. The famous general's troops in this field didn't even have swords. What else could they do? No. Huangfu Feiyu's angry and anxious voice came over, loud and powerful. Li Tianlan laughed ferociously. But when the devil troops slaughtered the Snowdance Corps in Eastern Europe, no one said no. When the devil troops stood with Rothschild and wanted to kill him, no one said no. When the Beihai Corps and the devil troop tried to exchange, no one said no. When Dongqing Rushi pulled out her sword, no one said no. Vegetative man. Could he say no? Li Tianlan took a step in the air and grasped Xianyuan blade. The pitch-black Xianyuan blade was completely deformed. The huge sword body began to become slender and long. The colorful light completely converged, and the darkness with the smell of death continued to spread. A nearly 5-meter-long spear appeared in Li Tianlan's hand. The tip of the spear was deformed. The crescent blades on both sides stretched out, and the nearly 5-meter-long spear turned into an extremely ferocious sky halberd. Have mercy! Huang Fu Feiyu's furious voice contained a trace of pleading that he didn't even notice. Li Tianlan's face was expressionless. He held the sky halberd in one hand and took a step forward. The next second he appeared directly in the crowd. The 5-meter-long heavenly halberd swept through the crowd with an incomparably ferocious killing intent, forming a perfect circle. At this moment it seemed that the whole world was red. It was the color of blood, so strong and so bleak. A large number of corpses and blood kept sputtering on Ling Tai Mountain. The pitch-black sky halberd whistled with a shrill sound. It was violent and domineering without a trace of reason. No one could withstand Li Tianlan's attack. The pitch-black sky halberd whistled and slashed. All the experts in the fire-flaming realm, the thunder-shocking realm, the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and the famous generals were directly smashed into pieces by the black light. Li Tianlan was completely crazy. Blood splashed and the mutilated corpses fell at his feet. The corpses were piling up. He didn't vent his anger at all. Instead it turned into a kind of hostility that made him want to kill everyone. Kill, 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 kill. Everyone deserved to die. Xianyuan Feng's domain was whistling and turbulent. The pitch-black sky halberd kept sweeping. The whole battlefield quieted down. Only the sound of the sky halberd breaking through the air could be heard. After a long time, Li Tianlan slowly calmed down. Xianyuan Feng's domain had completely disappeared. Everyone in the famous general's troop was gone. Around him were large pieces of flesh, limbs, internal organs and heads. There was no complete body as far as the eye could see. He was the only one standing there facing the void, waving the weapon in his hand. Huang Fu Feiyu and the two devils had already rushed over from afar. At this moment the handsome face of the top general of Beihai was full of undisguised despair. Li Tianlan tilted his head expressionlessly. His eyes fell on the two devils. The sky halberd was dragged on the ground. He took a step forward. All the scenes were retreating crazily. With a shrill whistle, the sky halberd had directly appeared on the head of one of the devils. With irresistible force and domineering power, the pitch-black sky halberd directly smashed down. Bang! The pitch-black sky halberd directly chopped off one of the devil's arms. The black light flashed again and the other arm flew up. Ah 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 ah. In the roar that sounded like crying and laughing, Li Tianlan completely released all the negative emotions that he had suppressed in his heart. The huge sky halberd danced wildly. Every time it hit the devil there was a lot of sparks. All the body parts flew out in the violent attack. Blood, broken bones, and the alloy metal implanted in the devil's body flew out piece by piece and were then smashed. Xianyuan Feng lit up one strong light after another, and the strong light directly enveloped the devil. Flames burned on the devil's body. The scarlet light was condensed to the limit, but under the strong light of Xianyuan Feng, it could not explode. Countless red light was absorbed by Xianyuan Feng bit by bit. The devil fell. Then the last devil. Xianyuan Feng had changed from the sky halberd to an incomparably majestic giant sword. The huge sword was slashing wildly and the surrounding space was constantly exploding. The red light kept flowing in the demon's eyes and was absorbed by the Xianyuan sword. On the pitch-black blade, the sun, moon, stars, mountains, rivers, and seas were all shining. The dim light shone on the blade, bringing with it an indescribable demonic nature. The most deterrent of the devil troop, the self-explosion, became no threat to Xianyuan Feng. One devil after another was smashed by the blade, and the explosive power was absorbed by the blade. The whole Xianyuan Feng seemed to show signs of coming back to life. Bang! With a crisp sound, the blade smashed the skull of the last devil and fell on the ground. It was still raining on Ling Tai Mountain. The cold rain fell on Li Tianlan. The killing intent that was like wildfire cooled down little by little under the pouring of the rain. Li Tianlan turned his head slightly. In his sight was Huang Fu Feiyu, whose face was pale. In the wild explosion just now he and Li Tianlan exchanged blows. The abundant sword intent almost destroyed the defense of Huang Fu Feiyu, a superior a half-step to invincible realm, and seriously injured him. But he was still alive. Li Tianlan looked at everything around him. The army of the Qiushui royal family, which produced many famous generals, was completely annihilated. All three devils died. Huang Fu Feiyu was seriously injured. In this city, in this mountain, there were no more enemies for him. Li Tianlan glanced at Huang Fu Feiyu, and the wild killing intent had not dissipated. His voice was a little trembling, which was the trembling of full excitement and venting. What else do you want to say? Do you know what you're doing? Huangfu Feiyu stared at Li Tianlan. From now on, the Huangfu family will fight to the death with you. The Beihai province will fight to the death with you. He struggled to stand up, and it seemed that he was going to draw his sword. Li Tianlan's figure flashed, and he appeared directly beside him. This time he didn't use his sword. Instead, his palm fell directly on Huangfu Feiyu's head. Boom! In the dull roar. The land nearly 20 meters around Huangfu Feiyu shook with a loud bang. The sound of bones shattering rang out densely. Huangfu Feiyu's eyes, ears, mouth, nostrils, and all over his body burst into a bloody mist. His body was directly pressed into the ground by Li Tianlan's palm, and he was twitching all over. Does it feel good? Li Tianlan lowered his head and looked at Huangfu Feiyu. Why don't you also try the feeling of being a vegetable? Huangfu Feiyu did not speak. His mouth was full of blood, and he stared at Li Tianlan with a pair of dim eyes. Li Tianlan raised his head and looked at the chaotic woods around him. In the Lingxi pavilion. On the huge screen, Li Tianlan looked over as if he was looking at every member of the Huangfu family. Everyone in the Huangfu family had an extremely ugly look on their faces. The hall was almost dead silent. Li Tianlan's voice came from the screen. Who else wants to stop me? Naturally, no one in the hall could respond to Li Tianlan. But in the woods there was a cold voice. Me too. Chapter 635. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and turned his head. A girl in white walked down the broken mountain road. Her white skirt fluttered, and she looked cold and aloof as if she was not in the mortal world. Li Tianlan looked at her quietly and did not speak. The girl's figure was still a little immature, but some parts of her body were already very mature. She was about 1.7 meters tall barefoot, and her proportions were almost perfect. A white veil covered her face, and her eyes that were exposed were incomparably deep. They were not as clear as the autumn waters, nor were they as warm as the sun. Her eyes were calm and cold but filled with a kind of innate charm. Li Tianlan watched her get closer and closer. To be exact, he was looking at the long sword shining with clear light in her hand. That hazy coldness seemed to be completely ignored by him. The long sword in the other party's hand had already attracted all of his attention. Autumn water sword? Li Tianlan asked. Yes. The girl's voice was simple and crisp. Li Tianlan was silent for a while. This sword was the goal of his trip, but he did not expect to get it here. But now the autumn water sword really appeared in front of him. Who are you? What's your relationship with summer solstice? Li Tianlan seemed to ask casually. Huangfu Qiushui. The girl looked at Li Tianlan quietly, and her pair of naturally charming eyes seemed to be able to attract people's souls. My master is summer solstice. Li Tianlan said. So, summer solstice returned the autumn water sword to the Huangfu family? It was my master who gave the autumn water sword to me. Huangfu Qiushui said quietly. Li Tianlan laughed. His smile was extremely bright, but the malice that had been suppressed was exposed little by little with his smile. With the most important purpose of his coming to Beihai, he bared his fangs and brandished his claws, looking ferocious and evil. He reached out to the girl and said calmly, "Give it to me." What? Huangfu Qiushui's beautiful eyebrows frowned slightly. The autumn water sword is in your hands, so the Huangfu family can now be regarded as a veritable sword-holding family. This is the belief that Beihai has been adhering to for hundreds of years, sacred and noble. I really want to know, when your sword is taken away, what will you so-called wealthy families do? Li Tianlan reached out his hand with a smile and said indifferently, I want this sword. Huangfu Qiushui suddenly clenched the autumn water sword in her hand. Her body turned cold. The Wang family was the leader of the 8 wealthy families of North Sea. Everyone knew this sentence. However, the North Sea province had developed for hundreds of years. As a large province with tens of millions of people and occupying countless resources in the North Sea, it could be said that there were countless powerful families. Among them, there might be families that were not weaker than other wealthy families. But in the past few hundred years, there were very few families in the North Sea that could be called a wealthy family. The fundamental reason was actually very simple. In the North Sea, strength didn't mean one could be called a wealthy family. Only a sword-wielding clan could be called a powerful clan. Qiushui Huangfu, who held Qiushui, was loyal and unswerving and produced many famous generals. The Qin clan of sky-piercing existed for 10,000 generations. They were as steady as a boulder and as immovable as a mountain. The Azure Wave Jiang clan possessed the power to split open the heavens, and they were loyal, brave, and fearless. The empress of the Xia clan, wielding the wrath of the heavens, was invincible and wild like thunder. The Glaze Yi family supporting Glaze, never abandoning it, and resourceful. The floating island Tang family controlled the heavens and killed people. They were rich enough to rival a country. The Wu family of Xingzhou held the hero, accompanying the emperor and approaching the country. The Wang family of Beihai held the wild tide. The royal power was supreme and they were invincible in the world. Wild tide, autumn water, glaze, amber, glaze, glaze, and glaze. These were the 8 famous swords that had been handed down since the establishment of the Wang family of Beihai. Each sword had a story when it was established in the North Sea, which was related to each family and the entire North Sea. The 8 famous swords to some extent were the sacred objects of the North Sea province. They were a kind of faith, something that all the wealthy families had been holding on to. Now the wild tide had been recast into Listen to the Sea. But the other 7 swords were still held by the other 7 wealthy families. Only the sword-wielding clan could be called the wealthy families of North Sea. This was glory, faith, heritage, and faith. Each famous sword could be said to be the foundation of each family's foothold. In a sense, it was more important than anything else. More than 20 years ago, summer solstice, the young lady of the Wang family of Beihai forcibly broke through to the invincible realm with the help of the autumn water sword of the Huangfu family. For many years, summer solstice and the Huangfu family had been close. Today, more than 20 years later, the girl named Huangfu martial god was ordered by her master to bring Qiushui back to the Lingtai mountain. The old cause and effect ended. A new cause and effect appeared. Li Tianlan stood in front of her and reached out his hand. He wanted the faith that the entire Huangfu family had held on to for hundreds of years. Huangfu Qiushui clenched the famous sword in her hand. Summer solstice gave this sword to her so that she could use the devil troop at the right time. In the absence of summer solstice, this sword was a signal for the 3 devils. No one thought that the 13 floors could absolutely restrain the devil troop. Now that the devil had fallen, she became the last barrier for Li Tianlan to get the autumn water sword. Do you know what the autumn water sword means to the Huangfu family? Huangfu Qiushui bit her lip tightly and looked at Li Tianlan. I'm going to take away the glory and faith of the Huangfu family, as well as the glory and faith of all the families in North Sea. Li Tianlan reached out his hand. Under the wind and rain, his face was as gloomy as the sky on the Lingtai mountain, cold and cruel. The clear sound of friction rang out slowly. Autumn water, which was deliberately elegant and delicate, was unsheathed inch by inch. The clear light shone slightly in Huangfu Qiushui's dress. In the wind and rain, the fluttering white dress became more ethereal. You want to fight with me? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. Huangfu Qiushui's strength was not weak. Her master was summer solstice, and her martial arts realm in the fire-flaming realm was enough to show that she was a real genius. But in this realm she could only rely on courage to draw the sword in front of Li Tianlan. Yes. Huangfu Qiushui's eyes were full of ice and crystal clear. Li Tianlan looked at her and did not speak. I'm 17 years old this year. Huangfu Qiushui said softly, her voice extremely serious. When I was born, my father named it for me. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. This martial god hopes that I can inherit the Huangfu family's famous general inheritance and even surpass my ancestors. My teacher likes me very much. She never held anything back from me when it came to martial arts. I also worked very hard. Her voice paused. That was the voice of a 17-year-old with a little childish. So I think that in the fire-flaming realm I will not be worse than anyone. Even if the one standing in front of me is a heavenly son because of myself. Her voice and eyes were completely soaring in an instant. It was not pride but a kind of restrained confidence to the extreme. I am a heavenly son. Li Tianlan was silent. Huangfu Qiushui looked at Li Tianlan and said in a calm voice, I am not a match for your highness now, but your highness's martial arts are perfect and everyone knows it. Today here Qiushui is bold enough to ask your highness to fight with me in the same realm. Do you dare? Li Tianlan laughed. At this moment he really appreciated this confident and calm girl. But, why should I fight with you in the same realm? Li Tianlan asked. For me, your highness is a senior. Do you want to bully a little girl like me? If your highness wins today, Qiushui will immediately go down the mountain. The Huangfu family has lost face and shed blood. I will naturally get it back someday. But if Qiushui wins by luck, Qiushui has no other request. I only ask that your highness go down the mountain. Senior. Li Tianlan's eyes were in a trance for a moment, and no one knew what he was thinking. Huangfu Qiushui was motionless, staring at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's eyes fell on the long sword Qiushui. He narrowed his eyes and slowly let go. The huge body of the coldness of 9 states was broken down one by one, turning into exquisite and perfect small swords. Huangfu Qiushui stared fixedly at the natural sword formation in front of her, her eyes intoxicated. Every small sword that floated gently in her sight was so beautiful and so majestic. The sword intent flickered, the sword chi fluctuated, and every move she made was the highest realm she was pursuing. Li Tianlan walked out of the sword formation. One move. He said lightly, you and I will fight in the same realm. If you can take one move from me, I will lose. His voice was flat, but it carried an extremely restrained, domineering aura. It was an indescribable momentum, a truly invincible spirit. Qiushui completely left the sheath with the clear light. Huangfu Qiushui's eyes were completely focused. She held the sword with both hands and raised it to her eyebrows. Your highness, please. Make your move. Li Tianlan waved his hand casually. The clear light suddenly shone under the rainy sky for a moment. Huangfu Qiushui's figure rose higher. The strong flame with a high temperature rose wildly in an instant. The orange flame lit up the sky, and in the blink of an eye, all the fire disappeared. Huangfu Qiushui's figure appeared above Li Tianlan and stabbed straight with her sword. The high temperature, which was so strong that it almost broke through the limit of the fire-flaming realm, burst out in the most violent way in an instant. The sky and the earth were all filled with fiery clear light. Huangfu Qiushui's white dress fluttered and her black hair flew. She held the sword edge tightly, pierced through the wind and rain, pierced the space and became one with the sword. She appeared above Li Tianlan's head in an instant with a high temperature. Li Tianlan raised his palm. Everything was completely still. The high temperature was directly annihilated in the faint, almost illusory sword intent. Huangfu Qiushui's figure stopped in the air. Everything was still in an instant. Li Tianlan raised his palm. To be precise, he stretched out 2 fingers and easily pinched the long sword that Huangfu Qiushui stabbed over. In that instant, all the momentum had turned into a joke. Huangfu Qiushui opened her eyes wide. At this moment she could feel that the other party's strength did not exceed the fire-flaming realm. But at the moment of contact between the two, she did not feel the slightest sword intent. The other party's small strength was used to the extreme in an extremely delicate manner. He grasped all her weaknesses in an instant and directly broke this sword in an almost inadvertent manner. Bang! Li Tianlan pulled down his palm and flicked his fingers. In the clear sound, countless clear light completely disappeared. The long sword Qiushui flew out of his hand, and Huangfu Qiushui's body was pulled to the ground by Li Tianlan. She raised her head blankly and looked at Qiushui flying high into the sky as if she was dreaming. The bright long sword Qiushui rose and then fell back into Li Tianlan's hand. Li Tianlan took the sword and flicked it casually. The sword formation of the 13-story buildings slowly surrounded his body. The long sword Qiushui was also hidden in the sword formation and returned to nothingness. Li Tianlan squatted down and reached out to lift Huangfu Qiushui's veil. Huangfu Qiushui opened her small mouth and did not respond at all. Li Tianlan quietly glanced at her and raised his eyebrows. This was a face so beautiful that it could no longer be described as beautiful. It could even be said to be the most aggressive face Li Tianlan had ever seen. It was not as delicate and sharp as Qin Weibai's, not as elegant and pure as Dongqing Ruxi's, and not as enchanting and quick-witted as Wang Yuetong's. This face was also extremely beautiful. It was slightly immature, but every part of her facial features was extremely seductive. This was truly soul-stealing. This was an indescribable coldness and seductiveness. The two were completely combined together, bringing with them a kind of attraction that could almost make one lose their mind. Cold, charming and holy. A real seductress. This was the first time that Dong Huang and the Zhongzhou goddess of martial arts met. After a short silence, Li Tianlong stood up and gave an evaluation that would make the martial god take to heart for a lifetime. The appearance is stunning, but the talent is just ordinary. Huangfu Qiushui's face was a little pale. She sat on the ground, raised her absolutely enchanting face, and subconsciously reached out her small hand. Give it back to me. Li Tianlong glanced at her. His eyes were indifferent and calm without the slightest surprise. Qiushui is in my hands. From today on, there will be no sword-holding family in Beihai, and the Huangfu family will no longer have any so-called persistence and faith. His figure moved forward along the mountain road. The mountains were green and the water was clear. The autumn rain was continuous. No one could stop his footsteps. This was the beer of the Qiushui family. At this time it was also his beer. Huangfu Qiushui was stunned for a while and stood up silently. Her white dress was stained with mud and she looked a little embarrassed and pitiful. She followed behind Li Tianlong quietly straight. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. She stared at him with a persistent face. Give it back to me. The fiery flame surged in her hands and she pounced on Li Tianlong. Li Tianlong did not look back. The 13-story building rotated slightly uncontrollably, and the 13 small swords vibrated at the same time. Huangfu Qiushui's body was directly swept out and fell to the ground. Her body moved and she spat out a mouthful of blood directly. Li Tianlong appreciated everything in the beer, appreciating that everything was under his control. He crossed the mountainside and entered the top of the mountain. In front of the antique Xianxia pavilion surrounded by clouds and mist, all the important figures of the Huangfu family had walked out of the hall. Everyone stood neatly in a square formation. Most of them looked a little pale but no one stepped back. What do you want? The wife of the patriarch of the Huangfu family looked at Li Tianlong quietly and asked. Li Tianlong was silent for a while and said, Where is Huangfu Yi? The patriarch is in Mount Dibing. Li Tianlong, let's see how long you can be arrogant. Huangfu Feiyang, the mayor of Qiushui City, said sternly. Li Tianlong directly interrupted him. If you talk too much you will die. Huangfu Feiyang's face suddenly turned red, but he really did not dare to say another word. He destroyed the Tang family, disabled Huangfu Feiyu and killed all the famous generals. He was a real madman. Was there anything he did not dare to do? Can you make the decision? Li Tianlong glanced at the woman standing in front of the crowd. I'm Xiao. The woman's voice was still calm. Huangfu Yi is my husband. Many years ago it was because of her that summer solstice took autumn water from the Huangfu family and broke through to the invincible realm. Li Tianlong narrowed his eyes and took a deep look at her. Autumn water appeared in his hand again. He held the scabbard of autumn water as if he was holding the will and glory of the Huangfu family that had persisted for hundreds of years. The famous sword of the Huangfu family. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Xiao. Where is it usually in the Huangfu family? Take me there. Xiao's eyes were slightly angry. What do you want? Take me there. Li Tianlong said lightly. Xiao stared at Li Tianlong fiercely. After a long time she took a deep breath, nodded slowly and turned to walk into Xianxia pavilion. All the people of the Huangfu family followed her. Li Tianlong walked behind the crowd. Huangfu Qiushui, who was a little staggering, followed Li Tianlong. A group of people slowly walked into the ancestral hall of the Huangfu family where their ancestors were enshrined. There was a dim light in the ancestral hall. All the people of the Huangfu family in the ancestral hall looked solemn. They stood in a row and saluted at the same time. Li Tianlong looked at the large number of memorial tablets in the ancestral hall and was silent. There was no doubt that this was the most sacred place in the entire royal family. In the middle of the ancestral hall was a jade statue made of the best Hitian jade. That was a truly peerless beauty. She stood in the center of the ancestral hall, cold and ethereal, vivid and lifelike, like a fairy who didn't eat the food of the mortal world. Li Tianlong looked at the statue quietly. In one or several eras hundreds of years ago, this was the woman who stood beside the chosen one. The Consonance Hall was also named after her. No matter how Beihai was today, Beihai in that era was always respected and awe-inspiring. Li Tianlong calmly bowed to the jade statue and saluted. This was respect for the past. Xiao's face eased for a moment, but her tone was still stiff. Qiushui was the sword of our ancestor. Most of the time it was placed in front of her. In front of the jade statue there was a sword rack. Li Tianlong looked at it for a while and suddenly said, "Unfortunately, from today on, Qiushui is mine." The faces of everyone in the Huangfu family changed at the same time with anger. "Qiushui is the famous sword of our Huangfu family. Your Highness, are you really not going to show any mercy?" Xia Rou suppressed her voice and asked word by word. "The Huangfu family and I." Li Tianlong looked at the statue with no expression. "No mercy. But I can give you a choice." His voice was quiet. "From today on there is no sword in Beihai, but the 8 sword-holding families in Beihai have the opportunity to have the sword of the Li family." He raised his palm. The exquisite and majestic sword formation emerged around him. Li Tianlong reached out and pinched the warm yellow in the sword formation. Tianguang sword. The ray of light kept expanding in his hand. Li Tianlong reached out and flicked it gently. The warm yellow light flew over the crowd and stuck straight in front of the jade statue. "What are you doing?" Countless voices abruptly rang out in the ancestral hall, and everyone's faces were filled with unconcealable humiliation. "From today on, the sword of the Li family will replace Beihai and become your new belief." "You bastard! Arrogant and ignorant! Do you want to humiliate us?" A grumpy senior member of the Huangfu family suddenly rushed up and reached out to pull out the sword. The sword intent of the Tianguang sword flowed. In an instant blood splattered. A bloody arm flew into the air, staining the floor red with blood. Li Tianlong watched all of this quietly. On this day he took away the persistence and glory of the Huangfu family for hundreds of years, and stuck his sword in the Lingtai mountain. The sword-holding families lost Qiushui. Tianguang blocked the entire Lingtai mountain with unimaginable humiliation and power. Li Tianlong slowly looked back. "You can hold the sword for the Li family in the future." He looked at the pale Huangfu Qiushui. "If you think it through, tell it and then bring it to Tianan to find me. In your dreams." Huangfu Qiushui gritted her teeth. "Take your sword away and give Qiushui back to me." Li Tianlong looked back at Tianguang. "It will stay here. It will always stay here." Li Tianlong's voice was indifferent. "When Wang Tianzong recovers one day, I will come to get it in person." End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 636. The continuous autumn rain fell from the autumn water to Tongtian. It was like Li Tianlong's journey. Tongtian port was by the sea. It was the largest port city in Beihai province and also one of the largest port cities in the north of Zhengzhou state. It was the most open city in the entire Beihai province. To some extent, it could be regarded as a cage set by Mount Dibing for the entire dark world. Every day at every moment, there would be cruises and freighters from all over the world docking. People from all over the world could be found everywhere. It wasn't a problem of being difficult to control. It was a problem of being completely uncontrollable. Because of this, Tongtian port became the best choice for the dark forces to infiltrate Beihai province. Could even be said that it was the only choice. Tongtian port was a microcosm of the dark world in Beihai province. No one knew how many dark forces, large and small, lurked here. They traded with all kinds of people, exchanged intelligence, and even with the Wang family of Beihai. The calm port city was surging almost every day. The Wang family of Beihai gathered all the chaos together and controlled the chaotic situation to the greatest extent. Over the years, the Wang family of Beihai had lost a lot because of Tongtian port, but they gained more. Here was the only window open to the dark world in Beihai province. The family that could control all the chaos in Tongtian port was naturally not an ordinary family. The Qin clan of Tongtian port was as steady as a rock and as immovable as a mountain. In the past 50 years, the Qin clan of Sky-Piercing port had been one of the most powerful sword-bearing clans. In fact, they were the strongest of the 7 great sword-bearing clans, and from the looks of it, they didn't seem to be in a state of decline. Qin Guijing, the governor of Beihai province, was now the most dazzling figure of the southeast group. In a few years, it was almost certain that he would leave Beihai province to replace Wang Qinglei in Wuya. Qin Guoyu, the patriarch of the Qin clan, controlled Tongtian port and was deeply trusted by Wang Tianzong. He was the most trusted right-hand man of Sword Emperor. Qin Gufeng, the third son of the Qin clan, codenamed Xianming, was stationed in Mount Dibing and controlled all the intelligence systems of the entire Beihai province. He was almost the eyes and ears of the entire Beihai province. This was the Qin clan, deeply rooted and as solid as a rock. For Xianxia state, the Qin clan was the political giant of the entire Xianxia state. And for Beihai, the Qin clan was an important cornerstone of the entire Beihai. The first female prime minister since the founding of Xianxia state was from the Qin clan. For Li Tianlan, after the Tianguang Soul Lock platform, the Qin clan of the port of Tongtian was his second target to be conquered or destroyed. That was all. In the endless autumn rain, Li Tianlan walked into a restaurant with a map in his hand. The restaurant was located to the northwest of Port Skyspan, less than 20 li from Painted Rose Mountain. The Qin clan's headquarters was located there. Li Tianlan found a place to sit down, looked down at the map and put it aside casually. Welcome. A middle-aged man stood in front of Li Tianlan, bowing slightly and smiling. His smile was neither warm nor respectful, but it was impeccable with a hint of insistence. He didn't seem to be a waiter but the owner of the restaurant. Li Tianlan glanced at him and said calmly, "Give me something to eat." The owner handed over a menu with a smile and said softly, "This is the best restaurant in Port Sky Piercing. In recent years His Majesty the Sword Emperor and Governor Qin have eaten here. What would you like? Everything is free today." Free? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and looked at him. His eyes were playful. Free. The owner nodded calmly and kept his smile. "This is the hospitality of Port Skyspan. Before your highness dies, this table of wine and dishes is to send your highness on his way." Li Tianlan slowly put down the menu and looked at the owner without saying a word. The owner still had a smile on his face. His voice was extremely calm. "Wine for your highness, the best wine. You know me," Li Tianlan said slowly. "Everything in Port Skyspan is under the watch of His Majesty the Sword Emperor and the Qin clan." The owner picked up the menu. "Your Highness, if you can't choose, how about I give you one of the signature dishes of this restaurant?" Li Tianlan laughed. "Do you think I will die? On Painted Rose Mountain under the all-world sword is your end." The waiter served the cold dishes. The owner nodded and put away the menu. "Excuse me." Li Tianlan looked at his back and said nothing. The cold dishes were put on the table. The waiter carefully brought over a bottle of 50-year-old Maotai with both hands, and then a bottle of red wine that Li Tianlan didn't know. Li Tianlan looked at it motionlessly. The autumn rain was still falling. The door of the restaurant was pushed open. A dirty white dress floated in. A little mud covered her face, covering her enchanting cold and charming face. She sat opposite Li Tianlan and looked straight at him. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." She looked like a dirty stray cat. She reached out to Li Tianlan and said in a hoarse voice, "Give autumn water back to me." Li Tianlan glanced at her and said nothing. From autumn water to Port Skyspan he walked all the way and the seriously injured girl followed him. He was adjusting his state bit by bit while the girl was getting weaker and weaker. But she always insisted on taking back the faith and glory that her family had insisted on for many years. They all say that the Qin clan is now the strongest among the sword-holding families. Is this statement correct? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. "Give it back to me." Huangfu Qiushui looked at Li Tianlan seriously and reached out with her dirty little hand. "Answer my question." Li Tianlan knocked on the table. Huangfu Qiushui grabbed it with her little hand, clenched and loosened it. She took a deep breath and said coldly, "The 7 sword-holding families have been up and down for hundreds of years. But in terms of comprehensive strength, the 2 families have never fallen out of the ranks of the top families. Not only in Beihai but even in the whole world they can be regarded as the top wealthy families. One is the Qin clan of Port Skyspan, and the other is the Tang family of Floating Island. You can't succeed. Even if you take away autumn water, you can't take away the faith of the 7 sword-holding families." She looked at Li Tianlan. Her charming and cold eyes were full of ice and snow. "There is a dead end in front of you and you will die on the road. This is what everyone in Port Skyspan is looking forward to." The owner of the restaurant came over with a plate of lamb. He put the dish in front of Li Tianlan and looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. "Your Highness is making an enemy of Beihai province and tens of millions of people. We respect your choice but the outcome is already doomed." He opened the Maotai on the table and poured himself a glass. "I propose a toast to your Highness. If your Highness has any requests, don't hesitate to ask me. I will try my best to meet them. I wish your Highness a safe journey." He drank the wine in one gulp and said flatly, The wine and dishes are not poisonous. Your Highness can enjoy them without worry. You are qualified to be the enemy of Beihai province. In the face of a real enemy, Beihai still disdains to use such despicable means. He nodded, turned into the kitchen and continued to serve. Li Tianlong silently picked up the wine glass and took a sip. I appreciate such a Beihai. He held the glass and his voice was low. After a pause he shook his head and said slowly, No, I respect such a Beihai. Even if we are enemies it still can't make people feel bad. You can't win. Huangfu Qiushui looked at Li Tianlong with cold eyes. I respect everything he has done for Beihai. Li Tianlong poured himself another glass of wine. He held the wine glass and was lost in thought. In fact, what everyone didn't know was that when he came to Beihai, what impressed him most was not the sacrifice of the famous troops and the devil troop on Lingtai Mountain, nor the calmness of the Huangfu family in the face of the catastrophe, nor Huangfu Qiushui's persistence and confidence, nor the endless resources of the 7 families and the upcoming battle. What touched him the most was actually the couple standing in front of him when he ascended to Qiushui. It was that sentence. He promised His Majesty Sword Emperor. That sentence alone was Beihai in his heart. That sentence alone made Wang Tianzong the most outstanding patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. He respected all this, but he had to destroy all this. But what made him a little helpless was that even if he would destroy Beihai, he still hoped that hundreds of years later his Li family and his Emperor Dong Palace would become like the Wang family of Beihai today. That kind of deep-rooted loyalty and conviction was the most shocking power he had ever seen. Wang Tianzong was a well-deserved patriarch, the best patriarch. He was also his strongest enemy, even the only enemy. Li Tianlong drank the wine in the glass in silence, and his eyes became calmer. The 7 sword-holding families, Mount Dibing, everything he did was to push that man down from his pedestal. Tianguang Soul Lock platform was just the first step. He held the wine glass and looked in the direction of Mount Hulu, so quiet that he seemed to become a shadow. In the restaurant all kinds of specialty dishes were constantly served, and soon the whole table was covered. The boss came up again with a huge wooden box in his hand. He put the wooden box in the center of the table and said with a smile, Your Highness, you don't have an appetite? Li Tianlong glanced at him and said nothing. I have another dish to go with the wine. This is a gift from the Chen clan. I hope you like it, Your Highness. Li Tianlong raised his eyebrows. The boss gently opened the wooden box. He looked at Li Tianlong's expression and there was no fear in his eyes. Huangfu Qiushui suddenly exclaimed and her face was slightly pale. Li Tianlong watched all of this quietly. Unprepared and abrupt, the process of suddenly witnessing was so clear. The wooden box, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page. It seemed to be very far away and very vague, but it fell into his sight in an instant and became clear. Everything became a clear consciousness and appeared in his mind. In the wooden box there was a head. The head was very clean without blood, but it was grayish-blue. The pair of dead gray eyes opened quietly, looking at Li Tianlong with deep eyes. Li Tianlong's body stiffened for a moment. His pupils contracted. He looked at the head in front of him and was silent for a long time. The head stared at him quietly. At this moment, Li Tianlong's whole person seemed to have changed. It was not the surging killing intent and sword energy. Instead, he who had become more and more illusory, seemed to become real in an instant, so real that it was a little dazzling. He silently picked up the wine glass and poured himself a glass of wine. Then he took an empty glass, poured another glass of wine and put it in front of the head. When I was a child, he opened his mouth and said in a hoarse voice, not too young. When I was 8 years old, I was very naughty. At that time our family lived on the border in the barren mountains and forests. Oh, the conditions were very bad. The conditions were very difficult. The materials given to us by Zhongzhou state often couldn't be kept for a long time. The rice would go moldy and the water would go bad. He lowered his head and looked at the exquisite and fragrant dishes on the table. The food at that time was really terrible. The rice was moldy with spoiled water and the porridge was black with a kind of stench. He shook his head hard and his voice was a little messy and incoherent. It was not delicious, too bad. At that time, in the deep mountains and forests, we could occasionally meet some prey, but we had many people. Even if there was prey, everyone could not get much. That year we killed a wild boar in the camp, which weighed more than 200 kilograms. Grandpa divided the meat and everyone got half a kilogram of wild boar. Grandpa ground the pork and put it in the porridge. The porridge was terrible but the meat was really delicious. After I finished the porridge I was playing outside. At that time there was a big sister called Yuner eating meat skewers. They were very small skewers. I wanted to eat them so I went to snatch them. He even beat me up. In the end her father found out. Yes, that's Uncle Hu. Uncle Hu slapped the big sister and gave me the remaining skewers of meat. That night I snuck over to their house and heard Uncle Hu coaxing his daughter. He said that there's still meat in the Southern Sky Army's camp not far from our camp. He said that he'll bring some back another day so that we can eat our fill. In the sound of his fingers tapping on the edge of the cup, Li Tianlan's eyes were a little dazed. At that time I didn't know the cruelty of the enemy and myself. I only knew that there was meat in the camp of the Southern Sky Army. So that night I didn't practice my swordsmanship. I sneaked out of the camp alone and wanted to find some food in the camp of the Southern Sky Army. I found the camp but of course I couldn't steal it. Before I got close to the camp the patrol team of the Southern Sky Army pressed me to the ground. They slapped me in the face and scolded me in words I didn't understand. Someone wanted to cut open my stomach with a bayonet and hung me on a tree. At that time I was scared to death and didn't want to eat meat. But that time when I was really about to be killed by them, Uncle Hu appeared. He alone slaughtered 6 patrol teams like a god descending to earth. The Southern Sky Army sent a regiment to chase us into Zhongzhou State. The South Sky Army sent a regiment to chase us into Xianxia State and chased us for nearly 30 miles. At that time there were many experts in the South Sky Army. Uncle Hu was shot several times and was covered in blood, but he kept protecting me. At that time he even smiled at me and said that if I wanted to eat meat I couldn't come here by myself. It was too dangerous. He would come and get it for me. He would bring me whatever I liked. I was also silly at that time. I said that I liked Sister Yun. Uncle Hu was silly and seemed very happy. He said that when he grew up he would marry Sister Yuner to me. He was waiting to drink our wedding wine. Crack! In the sound of breaking the wine cup was completely crushed. The wine flowed out. Li Tianlan took another cup and filled it with white wine. Then his arms trembled slightly. Later there was no later. The Southern Sky Army often invaded the border. The people in the camp were busy fighting and there were fewer and fewer people. Many uncles who loved me died. Uncle Hu also disappeared in a battle. When I was 12 years old, Sister Yuner, who was already 16 years old, also died. She was humiliated by the Southern Sky Army and even had her belly cut open by a bayonet. I always thought that Uncle Hu was also dead until I saw him again. He looked at Huangfu Qiushui with a strange calmness in his eyes. Do you know where he is now? Huangfu Qiushui's face grew paler. At this moment, Li Tianlan exuded more danger than danger. Li Tianlan looked down at the head in front of him. He drank the wine in the cup in one gulp, reached out his hand and held up the head. He bent down and gently kissed the cold forehead of the head, muttering to himself, Uncle Hu, you are here. In the almost suffocating atmosphere, Li Tianlan looked at the owner of the restaurant with the head in his hands and whispered, Thank the Qin clan for the gift for me. He paused and shook his head. No, I'll go and thank them in person. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 637. For the first time, Li Tianlan took the initiative to call Dongqing Wudi and asked to use the intelligence system of the entire giant group. He didn't go to the Samsara Palace, nor did he use the resources of the Purgatory of Heaven capital through his grandfather. Compared with these foreign forces, the penetration between the major groups in Zhongzhou State was undoubtedly the most covert and effective. To get the latest developments in Beihai Province, activating the intelligence system of the giant group was undoubtedly the fastest way. When the phone rang, the plane was crossing the sky and the spacious cabin was solemn. Dongqing Wudi answered the phone and his voice was a little low. Tianlan, are you in Beihai? Yes. Li Tianlan said without any nonsense. Minister, I need some information about Beihai. His voice sounded steady, but through the phone, Dongqing Wudi was keenly aware that his voice was trembling. It was a kind of unconcealable mournfulness, and eventually turned into boundless killing intent and anger. Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while and said calmly, What happened? Uncle Hu is dead. Li Tianlan's voice was soft as if he was murmuring to himself. Minister, Uncle Hu's head is in front of me now. He failed to marry his daughter to me. I owe him a glass of wine. He owes me a meal. Now Uncle Hu is dead. He's really dead. Countless suppressed emotions that were close to madness seemed to be about to burst out in the most violent way. Dongqing Wudi subconsciously clenched the phone. He didn't know who Uncle Hu was, but he heard the unshakable determination and killing intent in Li Tianlan's voice. I'll have someone contact you. Dongqing Wudi said without hesitation. Li Tianlan said, and hung up the phone directly. The sun was about to set in Eastern Europe. The warm yellow light filled the sky, illuminating large patches of clouds. Dongqing Wudi took out his mobile phone and sent a text message. Looking out of the cabin window at the gorgeous clouds that seemed to be burning, he was silent for a long time. He actually had a lot to say to Li Tianlan. He went into Beihai alone. Tianguang's Soul Lock platform. After the Eternal Sword in Eastern Europe ended, Li Tianlan was subverting the world's impression of Beihai province in a crazy manner that no one could imagine. The army of famous generals was wiped out. Huangfu Feiyu, the general of Zhou state and the vice-commander of the Beihai Corps, was seriously injured and disabled. The Huangfu family's legendary sword, Autumn Water, had changed owners. The Huangfu family was forced to give up the persistence and glory of hundreds of years. No one knew what they were thinking, but in the eyes of other people in the dark world, the imperial family that had presided over Qiushui city for hundreds of years was on the verge of collapse. Qiushui looked like a sword, but it was a sword that had countless meanings. To a certain extent, it could be regarded as the most important foundation of the Huangfu family. Now that Autumn Water was in Li Tianlan's hands, his next stop was the sky-reaching Qin clan. Zhou state had been strangely silent about it from beginning to end, but Dongqing Wudi had some worries in his heart. He had wanted to tell Li Tianlan to pay more attention to propriety, but Li Tianlan's calm but trembling words had fully explained his unchangeable determination. Dongqing Wudi tapped on his mobile phone in silence and suddenly said, "General, get ready to go back to Zhou state tomorrow." Tomorrow? General Nan, the deputy commander of the Navy of Zhou state, turned around in astonishment and hesitated. "But there are negotiations tomorrow. Ignore him." Dongqing Wudi shook his head. "Back to Zhou state." General Nan nodded and suddenly his face changed. He lowered his voice and said, "Marshal, is there any change in Yuzhou?" Dongqing Wudi shook his head slowly. "I'm going to Beihai." His voice was quiet and calm. "To inspect the Beihai Corps." In the silent restaurant, Li Tianlan carefully put the head back in the wooden box. He looked up at the owner of the restaurant and asked, "Painting Lu Shan?" The owner of the restaurant didn't speak but looked at Li Tianlan quietly. It seemed that something unexpected was happening little by little, and it was unstoppable. Li Tianlan shook the empty bottle and said calmly, "Bring the wine." The owner of the restaurant waved his hand. The waiter brought up an unopened bottle of Maotai as fast as he could. Li Tianlan filled it up in silence, clinked the glass in front of the wooden box and drank it up. The phone rang. Li Tianlan answered the phone. "Tianlan, something's wrong." The familiar voice sounded. It was the voice of Thunder God, the commander of the Blood Battalion of the Border Control Corps of Zhou state. Li Tianlan froze for a moment and then understood who the person in charge of intelligence of the Dongqing clan was. He breathed a sigh of relief and said, "What's wrong?" After the chaos in Eastern Europe ended, the Wang family of Beihai has been cleaning up the intelligence personnel of other forces throughout Beihai, but the action was not big. Until a day ago when you landed in Qiushui, many hidden elites of many forces seemed to be completely exposed at once. Samsara Palace, the Heroes Club, the Jiang family of South America. Even our people were affected, but Thunder God's voice paused. But at present the Purgatory of Heaven capital is the most affected. Almost all the elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital hidden in Beihai have been exposed. Beihai province launched an action as soon as possible. From Qiushui to Xinzhou it involved various cities. The elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital lurking in Beihai suffered heavy losses. Only a few survivors succeeded in breaking out. Those elites who broke out all fled to the port of Tongtian? Li Tianlan asked. Thunder God gave a wry smile. "This is the best choice. The entire Beihai province has been blocked. The floating population of the port of Tongtian can't be controlled. The chance to leave Beihai in the port of Tongtian is the greatest. Of course, the Qin clan is immovable in the port of Tongtian. It's not easy to avoid the Qin clan. Li Tianlong looked at the wooden box with the human head in front of him and fell silent. The information that deity was Li Guangtu was no longer a secret. When he knew the news, Li Tianlong naturally understood where the elites of the Li family who had been missing and even feigned death for so many years had gone. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was the Li family. An uncle who? He was a hidden pawn arranged by the Purgatory of Heaven capital in Beihai. He lurked in Beihai and successfully broke out of the encirclement as soon as he was discovered. He arrived at the port of Tongtian and finally fell into the hands of the Qin clan. The Qin clan's power was really fierce. Now that uncle who was here, where were the other elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital? Li Tianlong said, "I got it," and hung up the phone. A table of sumptuous dishes was placed in front of him. Li Tianlong looked at it for a while, slowly picked up the bowl and chopsticks and began to eat. He moved very slowly bit by bit and ate seriously and carefully. Huangfu Qiushui looked at Li Tianlong quietly. She withdrew her dirty little hands and her charming crystal eyes were full of fear. The fear was revealed little by little, with a pressure that almost suffocated her. She didn't know what she was afraid of. But now Li Tianlong was too quiet, so quiet that it was almost desolate. It was a silence without any killing intent or vitality. Whether real or illusory, in this desolation they all lost their meaning. "Don't mess around." Huangfu Qiushui looked at Li Tianlong and her voice trembled slightly. "An eye for an eye," Li Tianlong said softly. "It's a matter of course." The rice was disappearing little by little. The dishes were also disappearing little by little. Li Tianlong slowly finished the whole table of food and picked up the box with the human head. The sword intent flowed in his hands. The 13-story building rotated slightly around him, hiding the box in nothingness. Li Tianlong stood up and walked out of the restaurant. The restaurant owner, who had been watching Li Tianlong nervously, let out a long sigh. His face was pale and he was covered in cold sweat. The door of the restaurant was closed. Then it was opened again. Huangfu Qiushui followed him out. The restaurant owner picked up the phone, dialed a number and said in a trembling voice, "He has set off." The wind and rain were howling. Li Tianlong stood on the street looking in the direction of Mount Hulu, and was silent for a long time. In the increasingly cold rain he suddenly turned around and glanced at Huangfu Qiushui, who was looking at him nervously. "What do you think I should do with the Qin clan?" Huangfu Qiushui's delicate body trembled, and she looked at Li Tianlong with more and more fear in her eyes. Li Tianlong waited for a while and turned his head silently. In the wind and rain he slowly bent down and squatted down. In Huangfu Qiushui's sight, Li Tianlong untied his shoelaces. He took off his shoes and socks and stood barefoot on the street that was dripping with rain. It was cold, flat and heavy. Li Tianlong closed his eyes. The ground under his feet touched his skin, bringing him a steady stream of the most real power. Huangfu Qiushui couldn't help but take a step back. At this moment, Li Tianlong seemed to have undergone an earth-shaking change in an instant. He stepped barefoot in the rain, but his figure was indomitable like a giant. Mount Hulu, 2,000 meters above sea level, was not as high as the beer, but it was majestic and endless. The body of Mount Hulu revealed a kind of black that couldn't be concealed by the verdant mountain. Under the gloomy sky, the undulating mountains looked indescribably majestic and cold. Leaving the port of Tongtian and entering the suburbs, he walked along the path unimpeded. His bare feet stepped on the mountain path, through the neat and dense jungle, and a large number of buildings on the top of the mountain had been lit up. The beer was like a fairyland, and Mount Hulu was more like a war fortress. Li Tianlong stared at the top of the mountain in silence. Compared with the Huangfu family, which had been quiet in recent years, the Qin clan had been active in Beihai, Zhongzhou state and the entire Dark World. This was the top of Beihai province. A super wealthy family. In hundreds of years, the first female minister of Zhongzhou state, 2 presidents of Zhongzhou state, 4 first deputy ministers of the army headquarters, and nearly 20 members of parliament had emerged. For hundreds of years, the Qin clan had never had an invincible realm expert. But in the entire Beihai, they were the family with the most thundershocking realm experts, even no less than the Wang family of Beihai. Therefore, every blade of grass and every tree on Mount Hulu carried an indescribable glory. Li Tianlong moved forward slowly. Accompanied by the wind and rain, his voice covered the entire Mount Hulu in an instant, like the will of heaven and earth. "I'm coming." In the silence, only his voice kept echoing. Mount Hulu Tongtian Platform. Can Tongtian Platform really reach the sky? In the early autumn, a cold wind swept through the mountain forest, with killing intent and indifference. Endless killing intent slowly spread from the top of the mountain, biting cold like a tide. The sky slowly darkened. At night in Beihai, two figures appeared on the tall and neat canopies on both sides of the mountain road. Tiny lightning flashed on the two of them. More and more people appeared on the mountain road. Compared with the hundreds of famous generals of the royal family, Mount Hulu was a complete dragnet. There were figures everywhere. Countless people appeared in every corner of the mountain, front and back, left and right, and in all directions. Li Tianlan watched all of this quietly. His expression was calm, but his eyes were extremely bright. The lightning on the canopies became brighter and brighter. The gradually spreading lightning filled the entire mountain road, hundreds of meters, thousands of meters. Everywhere was dark blue. A voice sounded from afar, full, steady, indifferent, and calm. Your Highness, please go up the mountain to die. Your Highness, please go up the mountain. Your Highness, please go up the mountain. Go up the mountain. Go up the mountain to die. Go up the mountain to die. Go to die. Countless echoes kept echoing in the entire Mount Hulu like a tide. The whole Mount Hulu seemed to glow in an instant. Faint blue appeared in every corner of the mountain. Light and shadow filled the air. There were dormant sparks and flashing thunderbolts. The Qin clan's heaven-reaching formation. This was the largest sword formation known in the entire Beihai and even the entire Dark World. The Qin clan had been invincible for hundreds of years. The sky-reaching formation was the foundation of their immovable mountain. It was said that the real sky-reaching formation required the cooperation of thousands of people at the same time, with the Qi-controlling realm as the threshold, advancing step by step from the ice-condensing realm to the fire-flaming realm to the thunder-shocking realm. Finally, with the famous sword of the Qin clan as the core, the sword light of thousands of people was completely invincible and invincible. The sky-reaching formation was famous in the Dark World. That was because the sky-reaching port was the window opened by Beihai province to the whole Dark World. But almost no one had seen the sky-reaching formation. The sky-reaching formation didn't go out of Mount Hulu. Even if it appeared in the outside world, it couldn't be the ultimate sky-reaching formation of 1,000 people. It could only be a sword formation that was countless times simplified. Now Li Tianlan went up to Mount Hulu as an enemy. Except here, there was no complete sky-reaching sword formation in the whole Dark World. Invite me to die? Li Tianlan laughed. Do you think you deserve it? The Qin clan protects the world. On the sky-reaching platform there is the power of heaven. Your Highness, do you dare to go forward? The old voice continued to reverberate in the mountains. Li Tianlan didn't speak. He didn't hesitate and he didn't retreat. He stepped barefoot in the rain, facing the overwhelming sword light in front of him and strode forward. The sword energy of 1,000 people kept colliding and surging. Dense electric arcs flew directly toward Li Tianlan with blazing sparks. Li Tianlan's figure became more and more real in the flashing electric arcs. The space around him was completely distorted, becoming illusory and almost nothingness. Countless bolts of lightning and flames rushed into the empty space. There was no flash, no explosion. In the silence, that space devoured all the power without batting an eyelid. In an instant, at least 10 elites of the Qin clan were pulled out from the dark corner by an invisible force. The sword energy all over their bodies seemed to be completely exhausted in an instant. They fell to the ground without any vitality. Li Tianlan's pace was getting faster and faster. The empty space was spinning wildly around him, and the almost violent sword intent poured into the space with countless exclamations. As his figure passed by, the nearby elites of the Qin clan were frozen in place without any suspense, without any vitality. Because people kept leaving the sky-reaching formation, the electric arcs covering the whole mountain dimmed. Humph! In the old snort, the old man's cold voice suddenly sounded, Your Highness, do you really think that you can sweep the whole North Sea with a sword formation? At least here this sword formation is invincible. Li Tianlan's voice grew calmer. Huang Fuqiu, whose face was pale, opened her mouth subconsciously. She seemed to want to say something but she didn't know what to say. She was the closest to Li Tianlan so she could feel the change in Li Tianlan. She wanted to tell the Qin clan that it was not the 13-story building beside Li Tianlan who was destroying the sky-reaching formation at this moment. At least it was not the 13-story building. It was Li Tianlan himself. In the shortest time possible, Li Tianlan had become the real core of the 13-story pagoda. His breathing and heartbeat had been perfectly integrated with the 13 swords. At this moment, the 13-story pagoda was completely absorbing all the sword light. Anyone's sword energy would be absorbed the moment it came into contact with the 13-story pagoda. It was not even absorbing but devouring. It was devouring everyone's sword energy and even everyone's vitality. The 13-story building. At this stage, the sword formation was not even a formation of the Chosen One, but a real formation of the demon god. The 13-story building is indeed invincible. The old voice in the mountain laughed. I wonder if your highness can still be so strong without the 13-story building. It will be wherever I am. Li Tianlan said blandly. Really? The old man laughed. I have a gift for your highness. Bang. The sound shook the whole painting mountain for a moment. A figure flew directly through the wind and rain and landed not far in front of Li Tianlan. It was a middle-aged man about 50 years old. His whole body was covered with lightning and his body was still trembling slightly. Under the gradually darkening sky, Li Tianlan saw the man's face. His body suddenly stiffened for a moment. Bang! Countless electric arcs exploded on the middle-aged man. Flesh and blood flew all over the sky, like a bloody rain. The middle-aged man disappeared. There was only a piece of flesh and broken bones on the ground. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his head. In an instant, there was only madness and killing intent left in his eyes. Damn you! His figure moved forward crazily and in the blink of an eye he had advanced hundreds of meters. The 13-story building kept rotating around him, and the massive sword energy was completely devoured. In an instant the area hundreds of meters he had rushed through had become a dead zone. The faint blue radiance of the painting Lu Mountain dimmed visibly. Bang! 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 One figure after another flew over and exploded into flesh and blood all over the sky in front of Li Tianlan. The old man's voice was also full of resolute ferocity and madness. Your Highness, you can sweep the painting mountain with the 13-story building, but the elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital lurking in Beihai province, no, I should say the remnants of the Li family, nearly 200 people are around me. From now on, if you take a step forward, I will kill one person. Come on, kill, haha, come on. In the hysterical laughter, another figure fell in front of Li Tianlan. Then another person. Countless blood and broken bones exploded in front of Li Tianlan. That was the blood belonging to the Li family. Bang! Another figure flew over. The old man's voice became colder and more fierce. Come on or not? Come on or not? Li Tianlan's figure was completely frozen in place. In the blink of an eye, at least 10 elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital died in front of him. He didn't know some of them, but he was very familiar with some of them. They were the old people of the Li family, even the old people who played with him when he was a child. They didn't even have time to say a word to him. Li Tianlan suddenly calmed down. The illusory space around him also seemed to become stable. What do you want? He asked slowly. I've said it. The old man said calmly, Your Highness, please go up the mountain to die. If you leave the 13-story building and come to my heaven-reaching formation, I can let these people go and even leave you a whole body. How about that? Without the 13-story building, no matter how strong Li Tianlan was, he was just at the invincible realm. The heaven-reaching formation was formed by thousands of people, and the sword formation could not be broken. The old man had the all-world sword in his hand, and his real lethality was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm. How long could Li Tianlan last as the vanguard? Li Tianlan was silent for a while and said lightly, Where are you? The old man sneered. 20 steps forward and turn left. Your Highness can see me. Li Tianlan moved forward slowly. His bare feet stepped on the mountain road, making no sound at all. An unprecedented uneasiness appeared in Huangfu Qiushui's heart, and her body trembled violently. 20 steps. Turn left. Through the last glimmer of light between heaven and earth, Li Tianlan saw the real sky-reaching platform. On the highest pavilion of the supreme sky platform, a thin old man dressed in traditional Chinese clothing stood there, holding an ancient black sword in his hand. Less than 50 meters away from him, one figure after another was hung on a pillar, swaying in the wind and rain. When Li Tianlan saw them, they also saw Li Tianlan. The two sides were nearly a kilometer apart. Some people began to struggle wildly, but they couldn't make a sound. The old man looked at Li Tianlan and smiled cruelly. "Your Highness, do you want these remnants of the Li family or the 13-story building? Do you want me to kill a few bastards of the Li family for you to see?" His long sword flashed. The bright and shining sword light rushed over. At the forefront of the crowd, an elite of the Li family hanging on the tree was instantly smashed into pieces of flesh and blood all over the sky. Li Tianlan looked at him quietly. His eyes were so deep and calm that it chilled people's hearts. "Who are you?" he asked slowly. The old man raised his eyebrows and said faintly, "Qin Binghe, the uncle of the current patriarch of the Qin clan. The sword-bearer of this generation of the Qin clan." He raised the ancient sword in his hand. The black everlasting world looked incomparably cold in the dim sky. "Throw away the 13-story building and come up to die," the old man said calmly, "or I'll kill all of you with one sword." "Why should I believe that you will let them go?" Li Tianlan asked. The old man sneered and said gloomily, "You can only believe me. You have no choice." Li Tianlan suddenly laughed. His smile was bright, but with an extremely twisted cruelty and viciousness. A faint uneasiness kept brewing and finally turned into black clouds, with the shadow of death, covering the whole painting mountain. "Oh." He shook his head. "I have other choices." Qin Binghe frowned and said coldly, "Don't play tricks." Li Tianlan ignored him. He reached into the space of the 13-story building and carefully took out a wooden box. The wooden box was opened. The person's head peeked out from inside. His eyes were filled with indignation and indignation. Li Tianlan handed the wooden box to Huangfu Qiushui behind him and ordered, "Take it." Huangfu Qiushui subconsciously took it. Her body was trembling and so were her arms. Li Tianlan looked at the human head in the box and the blood around it. He chuckled and whispered, "Uncle Hu, I'll open this mountain for you." Li Tianlan. Qin Binghe's roar turned into a rolling sound wave. Li Tianlan turned back and stepped forward. He stepped on the ground with his bare feet. In an instant, Li Tianlan, who had been calm all the way, was glowing. He was incomparably glorious, so glorious that it was almost illusory. Meanwhile, the 13 floors appeared before everyone's eyes in an incomparably real manner. This time the 13-story building was missing a sword. But the 12 exquisite and beautiful little swords were still shining with soaring killing intent. Li Tianlan's body tightened, and endless sword energy poured into the 13-story building. He stretched out his hand and flicked it. His voice was calm. "Aquamarine." In the 13-story building sword formation, the dark green little sword suddenly flew out of the sword formation and rushed into the sky. Li Tianlan flicked his fingers for the second time. "Graceful." The dazzling light rushed out of the sword formation like a meteor. The third flicked his fingers. "Shadow." The sword light, which was as dark as a shadow, shot out. "Tianya." Twilight. "Silver moon." "Adjudication." "Divine weapon." "Donghuang." "Heartbreak." One by one, the exquisite little swords flew out and hid in the void. There was only one black little sword left in front of Li Tianlan. The pure black little sword was exquisite and majestic with unparalleled pride. The little sword slowly enlarged in Li Tianlan's hand. Li Tianlan looked at the sword and said its name. "Xianyuan." "Silver moon skylight." "Graceful aquamarine." "Tianya's gaze." "Void adjudication." "Phantom divine weapon." "Donghuang heartbreak." "Xianyuan." 13-story building, 13 swords. Every piece of Xianyuan sword was a real famous sword that could be handed down from generation to generation. Tianguang Soul Lock Platform. At this moment 12 swords appeared on Mount Painting at the same time. Li Tianlan held the black Xianyuan, took a step forward and said calmly, "Open." Night fell. The next second the whole Mount Painting, the whole world was shining. Boundless radiance blossomed in every corner of the world in the most splendid manner, enveloping the entire painted building mountain in a myriad of colors. The soaring killing intent danced wildly between the heavens and the earth unscrupulously. Light. The most dazzling light was everywhere. One after another, the famous swords with perfect shapes appeared in all directions in the air. But this time they were not exquisite but extremely huge. The 11 swords spun slowly in the air, each with a different color. In an instant they covered the entire sky in his vision. Qin Binghe opened his mouth wide. Everyone's face changed dramatically. In the extremely brilliant light, Li Tianlan held Xianyuan and stabbed it straight. The 11 swords shrank dramatically in an instant. The sky reappeared. The darkness was completely illuminated by the colorful light, and the continuous heavy rain turned into an unprecedented frenzied rain of swords. The rain of swords hit Mount Painting, falling in every corner. There were hundreds of people in the heaven-reaching formation. The rain of swords was thousands of drops. The rain of swords kept raging, and a large amount of blood instantly dyed the whole Mount Painting red. The blade of Xianyuan's sword stabbed out. Countless lights and shadows were constantly changing. One after another Li Tianlan appeared in the sky. Some held the silver moon, some held the shadow, some held the horizon, and some held the twilight. 12 swords. 12 people. Forward. Forward at the same time. The blade of Xianyuan's sword moved forward. The other 11 swords, 11 Li Tianlan and 11 sword qis were completely synchronized. Forward. Straight stab. Countless sword lights flew out of his hands. All the sounds disappeared completely in an instant. Only the light was spreading crazily. It was a splendid but silent world, real and illusory at the same time. Day and night alternated between real and illusory for a moment. Li Tianlan's figure disappeared. All the figures transformed by sword qis also disappeared. Only the sword lights crossed and converged in the air like lightning. An incomparably huge black sword appeared in the sky that was filled with dazzling light. The sun, moon, stars, mountains, lakes, and seas on the blade were shining at the same time. The huge black sword had an obvious gap, but it was full of domineeringness that could sweep the world. That was Xianyuan Feng. It was like a shadow but also like a real body. The huge black sword that occupied the whole sky fell on the top of the Mount Painting building in an instant, like a divine tribulation that could destroy the world. There was a loud roar. The whole Tongtian port was shaking. The earth was shaking and the sea in the distance was surging. The sky was falling and the earth was cracking. The huge sword fell down. Mount Painting building shook wildly. The huge sword blade pierced into the towering and heavy mountain. The most thorough destruction broke out in an instant. The mountain was constantly collapsing and cracking, and boulders tens of hundreds of meters high burst into the sky. A large area of luxurious buildings on the terrace of heaven was instantly turned into powder. Everything was destroyed. The majestic terrace of heaven was razed to the ground in an instant. In the loud sound like the end of the world, Xianyuan Feng's black sword body directly cut into Mount Painting building. The huge crack on the ground extended for thousands of meters. The scene of disaster appeared in front of everyone in the shortest time. The sword of domination. It was like the wrath of heaven. One sword split the mountain. The whole Mount Painting building was directly divided into two halves under one sword. The terrace of heaven standing on the top of the mountain completely became the Li family. The crazy smoke and dust continued to rise and spread in the wilderness. The world was completely silent. Mount Painting building was divided into two. The screams in every corner of the mountain also disappeared. The smoke and dust spread to every corner of the mountain in a trance. On the still calm and even the only complete mountain road, Huangfu Qiushui held the box tightly with both hands. In the box, Uncle whose faint eyes had closed. Huangfu Qiushui fell softly on the mountain road. There was an extremely complicated look in her charming eyes, which was helpless resentment, but also almost fanatical admiration. The smoke and dust were still rising. This sword split Mount Painting building, completely separating the elites of the purgatory of heaven capital from Qin Binghe. The sword energy of the 13-story building was mighty between the two sides, like a natural moat. One sword split the mountain. This strike was as long as the sound of boredom, but it was also as short as a flash of lightning. In the slight sound of footsteps, Li Tianlan slowly wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and looked at the dull Qin Binghe through the smoke. The two sides were very close to each other but separated by a cliff. Li Tianlan laughed. He looked at Qin Binghe as if he were looking at a dead man. Divine Emperor of the highest heaven. Chapter 638. The pungent smell of blood was all over the mountain. The billowing smoke and the sword light that illuminated the whole city slowly fell. The sky-reaching platform was filled with ruins and broken walls. The buildings that once covered the entire top of the mountain had completely collapsed. The painting mountain was divided into two. The mighty heaven-reaching platform almost instantly became a ruin. That unparalleled sword strike had almost completely split open the entire painted building mountain. A cliff that was nearly 1,000 meters deep was cleaved out of the heavy mountain. The cuts on both sides of the cliff were as smooth as a mirror. Even though the sword light had disappeared, the mirror-like sides of the cliff were still suffused with an incomparably cold chill and sword qi. Li Tianlan looked away from Qin Binghe and looked at the ruins of the heaven-reaching platform. Collapsed buildings, broken gardens, muddy water and twisted trees. One sword split the mountain. That could almost be said to be the sword of God. The sword light that illuminated the night swept everything with pure destruction. Nothing could remain intact under this sword. The heaven-reaching platform was completely destroyed. But not many people died on the heaven-reaching platform. As he left Autumn Water, the Qin clan was fully prepared for everything today. All the elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital gathered at the heaven-reaching port were captured and sent to the Painting Mountain. Almost all the experts of the Qin clan gathered and formed the heaven-reaching formation. Qin Binghe faced the enemy with the World Sword. Some women and children of the Qin clan had been transferred in advance. So there was little blood and few dead people in the ruins of the heaven-reaching platform. But the Qin clan was finished. With the hundreds of elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital as the bargaining chip in the heaven-reaching formation, the Qin clan had a great chance of winning this battle. So it could be said that the entire Qin clan fought against Li Tianlan with all their strength. No one could have thought that Li Tianlan and 13-story building could split the mountain with one sword. That sword, with a violent sword rain, smashed most of the formation of the heaven-reaching formation and split the painting mountain. Countless experts of the Qin clan were killed and injured. The women and children of the Qin clan might still be able to survive. But the entire Qin clan after this battle was like a beast that had lost its claws and teeth without any deterrence. In the world it was often easy and difficult to go up and down. Hundreds of years of foundation, countless glories and glories, everything completely collapsed in a single sword strike. The bloody cruelty covered the heads of every member of the Qin clan. This was the price of failure. On this day, perhaps there were still many people on Painting Lu Mountain. But in Li Tianlan's mind, there was no one alive on this mountain. Li Tianlan finally withdrew his gaze. His gaze landed on Qin Binghe. It was indifferent and cold without any pity. Qin clan, his voice floated in the two halves of the painted building hill like the wind and the waves. Unworthy to wield a sword. Unworthy to wield the sword of North Sea. He didn't deserve to hold the sword of the Li family. Like the coldest sentence, this sentence directly determined the fate of the entire Qin clan. Li Tianlan. You bastard. In the long silence, Qin Binghe finally digested everything in front of him. The Painting Lu Mountain had been split into two, and the sky-piercing platform had been reduced to ruins. More than half of the experts that the Qin clan had painstakingly nurtured for many years and accumulated over several generations had perished. Qin Binghe's entire body began to tremble. The pitch-black myriad worlds vibrated in his hand, and a violent killing intent surged out of it along with surging sword light. Little bastard. Damn you. Li Tianlan loosened his palm. Xianyuan Feng's huge blade disintegrated once again, turning into small exquisite swords floating in the air. The whole sword formation moved slowly in the air, covering half of Painting Lu Mountain. The subtle sword light shuttled slightly, cutting the ropes behind Li Tianlan one after another. Nearly 200 elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, who had been tortured until they were extremely weak, fell to the ground one by one. The sword formation froze in the air, completely protecting these elites. Qin Binghe suddenly burst into laughter. His laughter was miserable and resentful. He stared at the sword formation behind Li Tianlan. The sword formation composed of 12 famous swords was still exquisite, but compared to the beginning, it had become extremely dim. What this meant was self-evident. Without this sword formation, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Formation, what are you? Li Tianlan, what are you now? Li Tianlan remained calm and collected. The 13-story building split the mountain with one sword. In terms of power, The earth-shattering sword strike just now was infinitely close to the peak of the half-step invincible realm. Of course, Li Tianlan couldn't use that sword strike, but his sword intent was perfect, and the sword formation of the 13-story building was also natural. The moment the two combined, the sword strike was pushed to the extreme. But the core reason was actually energy. The energy absorbed by the 13-story building from the devil troop was completely used in this sword, causing a scene that was almost earth-shattering. Now the 13-story building returned to the state of nirvana and could only defend passively. But Li Tianlan without the 13-story building was still Li Tianlan. He flicked his palm gently in the void. The extremely clear sound of the sword resounded through Painting Lu Mountain on both sides. A clear light bloomed in Li Tianlan's hand. It was not any sword of the 13-story building. This sword light was extremely cold and sharp. It was so arrogant that it did not belong to the mortal world. Autumn Water Sword. Qin Binghe's expression became more and more ferocious. Li Tianlan thought of the elites of the Li family who died on the mountain road. He knew them and he didn't. His voice grew calmer and calmer. Without the sky-reaching formation, what are you? Qin Binghe laughed wildly. Who said I don't have the sky-reaching formation? Who said that? The pitch-black myriad world sword suddenly rose up with a violent sword light. In an instant, in different directions of Painting Lu Mountain, in the soaring smell of blood, bolts of lightning spread to the top of the mountain. Lightning and thunder from different directions quickly approached the top of the mountain. There was a touch of mockery in Li Tianlan's eyes. This was indeed the sky-reaching sword formation. All the power was gathered in one place. But could such a sky-reaching formation reach the sky? The clear light flashed on the top of the mountain for a moment, and Li Tianlan took a step out. His figure leaped over the sky, crossed the cliff that was like a natural moat, and appeared directly in front of Qin Binghe. The Eternal World sword chopped down with endless thunder. Densely packed arcs of electricity spread out in a frenzy. The lightning kept moving forward from all corners. Those were the thunder-shocking realm experts of the Qin clan who had not died. Everyone charged at full speed. Everyone's power turned into lightning, and in an instant they combined with the Eternal World sword. There was only one Eternal World sword. But the moment the sword light chopped down, the thunder filled the whole sky. The Autumn Water Sword in Li Tianlan's hand vibrated. The dazzling lightning seemed to tear the whole sky and smash toward Li Tianlan. This was Qin Binghe's sword move. This was the sword move of all the remaining thunder-shocking realm experts of the Qin clan. This was the last sky-reaching formation. Li Tianlan's figure suddenly spun. There was no 13 floors. Li Tianlan was still Li Tianlan. The heavenly sun was still the heavenly sun. The cold sword light kept blooming in front of him, and the sword energy, which seemed to tear the sky apart, spread and condensed as Li Tianlan's body rotated. In an instant, an extremely sharp storm appeared on the broken Painting Lu Mountain. The storm kept spinning with Li Tianlan's rotation and turned into a tornado that filled everything. The tornado tore the space and all the air around it was distorted in a state visible to the naked eye. Li Tianlan's figure was getting faster and faster, and the sword light was getting sharper and sharper, as if endless sword energy was flying constantly. The dazzling clear light grew bigger and bigger with unimaginable strength, and finally turned into a whirlpool of sword energy of nearly 100 meters. It was natural and flawless. The Eternal World sword fell. The storm brought by the autumn water spun and directly hit the thunderbolts that were as dense as the sky. Boom! In the huge roar, more than a dozen thunder-shocking realm experts and Qin Binghe broke out with all their strength, and the thunderbolts that were as solid as substance shook violently in an instant. The rotating storm tore the thunderbolts that were like the sky without any stagnation. The sword light kept spinning. It looked extremely calm, but it was extremely crazy. Pieces of thunderbolts kept breaking and flying, exploding in every corner of the Painting Lu Mountain. The arc of light spread and scattered everywhere. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Only the clear light kept spinning in the blue sky, splitting the endless thunderbolts, cutting everything and moving forward bravely. No power could interrupt the storm-like sword move. This was not the 13 floors. This was Li Tianlan's own kendo. The sky-splitting move. The earth-splitting sword energy kept flying with the most stunning clear light. The autumn water tore the thunderbolts that were like the sky. Several thunder-shocking realm experts who had rushed to Qin Binghe's side were torn apart in an instant. The sword light didn't stop. The shining arc of the autumn water sword hit the blade of the Eternal World sword in an instant. It was straightforward, decisive and fierce. There was no stalemate or suspense at all. The 10,000 worlds that represented the Qin clan's hundreds of years of glory and faith shattered in an instant. The pitch-black sword flew into the heavenly platform with lightning arcs and exploded into a pile of rubble. The autumn water that was shining with a clear light did not stop moving forward at all. It cut Qin Binghe's body in half as he screamed in fear. A large number of thunderbolts spread and disappeared in the constant turbulence. Only the indomitable storm grew fiercer and fiercer. The shining cyan light swept through the ruins of the painting Lu Mountain with the fierce wind and rushed into the jungle. Countless trees were broken and smashed. The electric arc between the mountains flickered for a moment and disappeared completely. Only the storm that gathered the clear light kept spinning, with death and irresistible majesty. Beihai Zhongzhou State. On the night of September 3rd, Li Tianlan, the palace master of Emperor East Palace, entered the heaven-reaching port and climbed the painting Lu Mountain. The Qin clan formed the heaven-reaching formation and fought with the power of the whole clan. The 13-story building broke the formation and the swords split the mountain. That night, Qin Binghe, the swordsman of the Qin clan, died. 6 guests of the Qin clan died. 23 thunder-shocking realm experts of the Qin clan died. The heaven-reaching formation composed of nearly 1,000 elites of the Qin clan was slaughtered. The heaven-reaching sword of the Qin clan was cut off by the autumn water sword. There was no one alive in the entire painting Lu Mountain. In the deep night, the bodies of all the thunder-shocking realm experts of the Qin clan, including Qin Binghe, were hung up. The strong smell of blood attracted countless vultures to fly over. Li Tianlan watched the vultures gnawing on their bodies in silence for a long time. Countless bodies gradually turned into skeletons without flesh and blood. Li Tianlan flicked his fingers and ignited the fire. The fire spread from the painting Lu Mountain, devouring the bodies, the ruins of the heaven-reaching platform and everything. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. In the strong fire he felt lonely for the first time. The fire was spreading. Li Tianlan slowly turned around. Nearly 200 elites belonging to the Li family and the Purgatory of Heaven capital looked at him, and their eyes were full of fanaticism. Someone knelt down first. Everyone knelt down one by one, densely and neatly. "Greetings, young master." It didn't matter what their identities were. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was good. The Li family was good. From now on they all belonged to Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan raised his hand. A bright light flew out of his hand and fell on the ruins of the heaven-reaching platform surrounded by fire. The light kept twisting and extending and finally turned into a sharp and cold long sword. 13 floors. Divine weapon. Li Tianlan looked at the crowd kneeling in front of him and said calmly, "Get up, let's go to Mount Dibing." He went down the mountain first. Nearly 200 elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital followed behind him in a mighty manner. Huangfu Qiushui, who struggled to stand up from the mountain road, followed the crowd. She looked at Li Tianlan in the front with a blank look in her eyes. At this moment she seemed to suddenly not know what she was doing. The autumn water sword was still in Li Tianlan's hand. At this moment, everything in her sight seemed to be witnessing history. Witnessing the arrival of a real new era. Late at night on September 3rd. The fire filled the painting Lu Mountain. In the blood and bones, the heaven-reaching platform of the painting Lu Mountain was set on fire. Only the famous divine weapon belonging to Dong Huang remained there, cutting off everything on the heaven-reaching platform. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 639. Time passed from late at night to early morning. The autumn rain turned into a rainstorm, sweeping the entire Beihai with a cool atmosphere. Beihai province was in the north. Strictly speaking, it was also a province without spring and autumn. After the cool summer passed and the rainstorm passed, the cold winter would come quietly. Just like Li Tianlan's journey from Qiushui to Xingzhou through the wilderness and the sea, the cold temperature went all the way north. The snow would fall in the cold temperature. The entire Beihai province was covered with snowflakes, beautiful and holy. The rainstorm was accompanied by thunder and the world was in chaos. The sky above Tongtian port was gloomy and black. The world seemed to be unchanged. Rain was everywhere, day and night, and there was almost no light. Li Tianlan never left Tongtian port. Nearly 200 elites from the Purgatory of Heaven capital followed him out of Mount Hulu. As soon as they returned to the downtown area of Tongtian port, Li Tianlan directly booked the best hotel in Tongtian port. 187 people occupied 2 floors. In Beihai it was midnight. Li Tianlan spent a lot of effort to find a doctor, and he accompanied the doctor to walk from room to room, checking the physical condition of each elite. Qin clan took advantage of the absolute control of Tongtian port to capture nearly 200 elites from the Purgatory of Heaven capital in the shortest time. This move was indeed ruthless, but the main purpose of doing so was to deal with Li Tianlan. All-World Sword Qin Binghe and Tongtian Formation. Qin Zhu used a head to directly infuriate Li Tianlan, and these nearly 200 heads that could be chopped off at any time were important chips to suppress Li Tianlan. Because of this, although these elites were inevitably tortured when they fell into Qin Zhu's hands, not many of them were really tortured. Most of them only had some seemingly serious external injuries, as well as a sense of weakness and powerlessness brought about by hunger and cold. After a few days of rest, they would basically be able to move freely. Several seriously injured elites were sent on a plane to leave Beihai that night. Li Tianlan walked from room to room. It was already the morning of September 4th when he sent the doctor away. The rain was still pouring. Li Tianlan sat in a rattan chair in the hotel, looking at the wind and rain outside through the huge French window. He was as quiet as a shadow. In the slight sound of footsteps, Huangfu Qiushui, who had changed into a white dress, walked over gently. She stood beside Li Tianlan and poured him a cup of tea. She had just taken a bath, and her dirty little face had become as clean as before. Her entire body was tender and delicate, and from head to toe, she seemed to be emitting a kind of lustrous and gentle radiance. There was no light in the room. She stood in the gloomy morning light like a white lotus, stunning the wind and rain outside the window. The tea in the small teapot rippled gently. Huangfu Qiushui put the teapot on the crystal table and did not speak. "How did you get in?" Li Tianlan glanced at her and frowned. Huangfu Qiushui had followed him from the beer to the sky bridge, up the painting mountain and then to this hotel. Huangfu Qiushui didn't know what to do with Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan also didn't know why he let the girl follow him for so long. He looked up at the pretty face in the dim light. Her facial features were soft and delicate, like a work of art. In terms of appearance alone, she was not necessarily more beautiful than Dongqing Rushi and Wang Yuetong. But that touch of natural coldness was enough to turn into a fire in the eyes of men. It was a kind of charm without any deliberate intention. It was cold and clear, charming and clean, plain and light, but with a kind of unforgettable elegance. Martial God Huangfu. Huangfu Qiushui. Li Tianlan thought of these two names in silence. Huangfu Qiushui was slightly stunned and whispered, "I've been here all the time." She naturally followed Li Tianlan into this suite, took a bath here and slept in the bedroom. Li Tianlan was busy taking care of the wounded of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, so he didn't notice. Perhaps the elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital noticed, but they didn't say much. So the night passed very peacefully. Until Li Tianlan came, she personally made a pot of tea and put it in front of Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan glanced at her again. His eyes were calm and deep and his pupils were almost pure black. There was indescribable coldness in the silence. Huangfu Qiushui's delicate body trembled slightly. She didn't know why, but every time she saw Li Tianlan's eyes, she had a kind of fear from the bottom of her heart. Her courage to fight with Li Tianlan at the same realm on the spiritual mountain seemed to have long disappeared. Li Tianlan suddenly lost some interest. He picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea, then said calmly, "You can go." Huangfu Qiushui was stunned. That charming and pure little face was filled with confusion, and it was breathtakingly beautiful. She asked subconsciously, "Where to?" "Wherever you want to go." Li Tianlan's voice was emotionless. Huangfu Qiushui stared at Li Tianlan blankly for a while. She gently bit her lip. In the dark environment, her lips were beautiful and rosy, shining with a seductive luster. "That Qiushui," she stammered and whispered, "can you give it back to me?" "Qiushui is not yours." Li Tianlan answered the question directly for the first time. Vaguely, he seemed to know why she had been following him. "That is my trophy. You have the right to take it back, provided that you defeat me." He looked at the pair of soft and charming eyes shining with countless emotions, and his tone was low like the temptation of a demon. Or, Tianguang is on the spiritual platform. When you think it through, tell Tianguang and then take it to Tianan to find me. Qiushui is yours. And the Huangfu family is mine. Huangfu Qiushui's body shook and she shook her head. Her face was pale. Impossible. Li Tianlan said no more. He picked up the teacup and said, "You can go." "I won't." Huangfu Qiushui looked at Li Tianlan with wide eyes and her voice was stubborn. "If you don't go you will regret it." "I won't go, I won't go. Come and kill me." Huangfu Qiushui said fiercely. Li Tianlan didn't speak. In the still gloomy but gradually brightening dawn, he looked at the wind and rain outside the window. His movements were stiff and his eyes became a little dazed. "I won't. Let go of me, you bitch." "I won't let go, Li Tianlan, you bastard." "Bitch, let go." "I won't. Let go of me." "I won't let go, I won't let go. Come and kill me." His thoughts went back to Eastern Europe before the end. At this time he suddenly remembered that when he first saw the master of Samsara Palace in Eastern Europe in the hotel room, she seemed to be like him now, facing the window, guarding the tea and watching the wind and rain outside the window. But what was she thinking at that moment? Li Tianlan held the teacup and sighed softly. He stretched out his hand and pointed to the bedroom door. Huangfu Qiushui stood there very disobediently. Instead of going back to the bedroom, she pulled out a chair and sat opposite Li Tianlan. She opened her eyes wide and stared at him. She was like a kitten who had suffered all kinds of grievances but still refused to give up and still insisted. Grievances couldn't be said in the world. It didn't make sense. Li Tianlan's eyes did not waver at all. She was a beauty, a stunning beauty in the world and also an enemy. There was a slight knock on the door. Li Tianlan answered with a Huangfu Qiushui was about to get up and open the door, but the door had been pushed open. A middle-aged man with gray temples and an ordinary appearance walked into the room with a pot of wine. The middle-aged man was completely the kind of person who could be forgotten at a glance. He was so ordinary that there was nothing special or outstanding about him. He looked a little old and his breath was extremely weak, but he was unusually hearty and enthusiastic when he smiled. "Young master," he called softly. Li Tianlan, who didn't know what to think, looked back, got up at once and walked over. "Uncle, you should rest more now." The middle-aged man's code name was Tianyi, which was also his real name. Among the nearly 200 elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, he was one of the people Li Tianlan was most familiar with. In Li Tianlan's memory, Tianyi disappeared from the Li family's camp less than 6 years ago. At present, his tombstone was still in the Li family's cemetery in Lonely Mountain, so Li Tianlan recognized him at first sight. "It's okay." Tianyi smiled, put the wine pot on the table and sat down. He glanced at Huangfu Qiushui in surprise but didn't say much. He just said softly, "I'm here to discuss something with you, young master." "Go ahead." Li Tianlan smiled and looked at the wine pot. "Uncle Yi, I haven't recovered from my injury. Let's drink tea today." Huangfu Qiushui stood up, took an empty cup and was about to pour tea. Tianyi waved his hand and said with a smile, "No, I'm happy today so I want to drink." He took the cup from Huangfu Qiushui's drawer and poured himself a full cup. Li Tianlan's mouth moved but he didn't say anything. "How is His Highness's injury?" Tianyi took a sip of wine, was silent for a moment and suddenly asked. Li Tianlan was stunned for a moment before he understood who Tianyi was talking about. He frowned slightly and shook his head. "He is still in a coma. His injury is very serious and his foundation is completely destroyed. But the immortality seal is a unique skill that can reshape the foundation. But at present, even if he can recover, it will take a long time to recuperate and," he paused and said calmly, "how can there be a unique skill that can really reshape the foundation? The immortality seal is also flawed. Even if it can be recovered, it will be difficult for him to return to the peak state when he was in Eastern Europe." Tianyi held the wine cup and his eyes were a little complicated. During the trip to Eastern Europe, the Purgatory of Heaven capital had suffered heavy losses. Li Guangtu was seriously injured and in a coma. The Purgatory of Heaven capital had been in chaos to varying degrees. This was just an internal problem. In East Island, Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace were also eyeing covetously. Li Guangtu's state and the future of the Purgatory of Heaven capital were almost inseparable. Actually, Inside the purgatory of heaven capital. Young master, you should. Tianyi took a deep breath and hesitated as if it was difficult to speak. I know. Li Tianlong said calmly. He doesn't like me. He even wanted to kill me, right? Tianye's face changed slightly. The purgatory of heaven capital is the Li family, but it belongs to him. But Uncle Yi, does the purgatory of heaven capital really belong to him? Li Tianlong asked. Tianyi smiled bitterly. How is that possible? There are many old guys in the purgatory of heaven capital like me who watched the young master grow up. How can they give up the young master? Li Tianlong nodded and poured himself a glass of wine. It's a good thing but also not a good thing. Tianyi sighed, nodded and said nothing more. There were still forces supporting Li Tianlong in the purgatory of heaven capital, but the purgatory of heaven capital, which belonged to deity, obviously did not regard Li Tianlong as the successor of the purgatory of heaven capital. This was an irreconcilable contradiction. It was good because in the process of Li Tianlong controlling the purgatory of heaven capital in the future, there would be forces supporting him to help him. It was not good because the Li family, which had been down for a long time and had not really risen, could not afford the so-called civil strife. This was undoubtedly a thorny problem. It was impossible for him to give up the purgatory of heaven capital. And with Li Guangtu's stubbornness, he was destined not to compromise. Who wants to kill me? Li Tianlong asked suddenly. Tianyi was stunned. The sentence was extremely harsh, but it was also the truth. Most of the members of the Endless Forest Palace, Longevity Palace and Undying Palace are loyal to His Highness. Tianyi said slowly. Dawn, daybreak and phoenix. Li Tianlong narrowed his eyes and nodded. But most people in the Hall of Heavenly Death will support young master. Tianyi said calmly. Li Tianlong raised his eyebrows and was about to speak when Huangfu Qiushui beside him suddenly stood up and said incredulously, Heavenly Death belongs to the purgatory of heaven capital? Tianyi glanced at her and said quietly, Strictly speaking, heavenly death belongs to young master. You are a heavenly death. Huangfu Qiushui subconsciously made a sword-drawing gesture, but when she moved her palm she remembered that the autumn water sword had been taken away by Li Tianlong. She stood there with a blank face. Tianyi keenly noticed Huangfu Qiushui's subconscious movement underwater and frowned slightly. What is heavenly death? Li Tianlong remained calm. Tianyi glanced at Li Tianlong helplessly and hesitantly. Only now did he realize that there was something wrong with Huangfu Qiushui. Huangfu Qiushui was extremely beautiful, while the young master was truly young and promising. He had thought that this beautiful girl was a little pet that the young master kept in his bed, but looking at her now, it was obvious that this was not the case. 15 years ago, the day before the Qin clan's celebration, the Tongtian port was under martial law. The Qin clan captured nearly 300 spies from various superpowers in one day. That night the sword light was like the sun. Qin Bingshan, the leader of the Qin clan and an expert of the half-step invincible realm, was beheaded. 6 experts of the thunder-shocking realm of the Qin clan were killed, and Mount Painting House was in chaos. 12 years ago the Polar Ground Alliance found the ice marrow, which is an extremely important material for making the immortality potion. The Polar Ground Alliance was close to the water, so they collected all the ice marrow and made an agreement with the Wang family to exchange for the immortality potion. On the 3rd day after the news was leaked, the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance was ambushed. The ambush lasted for nearly 15 minutes. Someone fought to the death under the full attack of Tyrant. The ice marrow was completely plundered, and the Polar Ground Alliance suffered heavy casualties. 10 years ago the Emperor of Heng State passed away. 2 assassins sneaked into the imperial palace of Heng State where experts gathered. 6 heirs to the throne were killed in one day. That's why the 6th prince, who still has no legitimate right to the throne, is born. 7 years ago the cloud silk was found in South America. The Jiang family of South America and the Heroes Club fought. The men in black in the fantasy world entered South America together. At the most critical moment all the cloud silk was stolen. Olsen, the vice president of the Heroes Club who was responsible for guarding the cloud silk, was assassinated in the secret chamber. 7 years ago the organization that had committed countless crimes in the past 10 years and never failed was exposed. The master of Samsara Palace took action in person. Both the military counselor of Saint were seriously injured. After a premeditated raid, The Samsara Palace seized the cloud silk, but they failed to stop the assassins. Huangfu Qiushui glanced at Li Tianlan. Later, the cloud silk became clothes, and the master of Samsara Palace gave the clothes to you. Li Tianlan listened quietly. Huangfu Qiushui's voice was clear and cold. It was very pleasant to hear. From then on, the dark world knew the name of this mysterious organization, Heavenly Meteor. The fight with the Samsara Palace was the first and only failure of Heavenly Meteor. No one knew where the headquarters of Heavenly Meteor was or how many people they had. They didn't have a code. To the public, they only had one identity: Heavenly Meteor Warriors. They may not be the most famous killer group, but they are definitely the best hidden killer group. Killers were different from anyone in the dark world. Even in the dark world, an assassin needed to hide. The assassin who hid the best was the strongest assassin. Who are you? Tianyi narrowed his eyes tightly. He looked at Huangfu Qiushui like a tiger choosing its prey. She knew Heavenly Meteor and even knew what Heavenly Meteor had done. This kind of knowledge was definitely not as simple as a pet who only knew how to please a man in bed. Huangfu Qiushui. The girl looked at him with cold eyes. Are you a Heavenly Meteor warrior? The young martial god of the Huangfu family. Tianye's face gradually changed subtly. He subconsciously glanced at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan shook his head. I'm fine. He pointed to the door of the bedroom and glanced at Huangfu Qiushui. Huangfu Qiushui was silent for a while, then turned around and walked into the bedroom obediently. Li Tianlan waved his hand, and an invisible sword intent enveloped them, completely isolating everything from the outside world. He stared at Tianyi. Heavenly Meteor. Tianyi was silent and finally smiled. It's the Heavenly Meteor she mentioned. He could fight with Tyrant and the master of Samsara Palace. He could retreat unscathed. What did this mean? Li Tianlan was silent for a long time before he slowly said, So, Heavenly Meteor is a part of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, so he is not the only invincible realm expert in the entire Purgatory of Heaven Capital? He suddenly frowned. Then why didn't Heavenly Meteor appear in the chaos of Eastern Europe? Tianyi frowned and slowly said, The master of Heavenly Meteor Palace has always been in Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan looked at him. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, in the camp of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, he only saw two real experts, Dawn and Daybreak. Young master, did you remember wrongly? I just said that Heavenly Meteor Palace has always been standing by your side. Tianyi said meaningfully. Moreover, it's not accurate to say that Heavenly Meteor is a part of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. It should be a part of the Li family. But when Heavenly Meteor and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital are put together, it can be regarded as the real Purgatory of Heaven Capital. For many years, Heavenly Meteor has been cooperating with the will of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, but no one in Heavenly Meteor knows that the god of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital is His Highness Li Kuangtu. He looked at Tianyi and whispered, That's why you are the young master of Heavenly Meteor. Young master, don't you understand? In an instant, Li Tianlan's eyes suddenly became clear. Killer groups, assassin groups with invincible realm experts. Top assassin groups with invincible realm experts, who had a close relationship with the Li family and had always been standing by his side. He was their young master. He was also their young governor. Sai City. Li Tianlan sighed softly. Sai City is Heavenly Meteor? Tianyi laughed. So although your highness controls the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, the overall situation has been influenced by Senior Li for so many years. Li Tianlan was speechless for a moment. After going around and around, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and Sai City were all one. But in the final analysis, it was the Purgatory of Heaven Capital that didn't recognize him, and it was Sai City that supported him. In fact, there was no change. What about you? Li Tianlan whispered. Uncle Yi, are you also a Heavenly Meteor warrior? Young master, are you laughing at me? Tianyi laughed. Li Tianlan coughed and did not speak. Tianye's martial arts strength was actually very ordinary. He was in the Fire Flaming Realm and he was not even at the peak of the Fire Flaming Realm. With such strength, it was impossible for him to enter the Heavenly Meteor Palace. In the sequence of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, I am a Tianluo. Tianyi said. Heavenly Meteor. Tianluo. Heavenly Meteor was responsible for assassination. It was the sharpest sword. Tianluo is responsible for intelligence. Tianyi said slowly. This time the people who were captured by the Qin clan in Tongtian port are the backbone elites of Tianluo. Young master, our strength is actually very ordinary, but in the field of intelligence collection and analysis, we can be said to be real experts. Among the people you saved today there are the top disguise masters, the top hackers, the most professional private detectives, the best disguise masters. If it wasn't for a mistake that caused our list to be exposed, the Qin clan wouldn't have been able to catch us. Tianyi paused and laughed. But for now, although some colleagues were sacrificed, it is also a good thing. Including me, there are nearly 200 people here, which can be regarded as gifts from the Lord of Tianluo Temple to your highness. Gifts. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. Yes. Tianyi nodded. We're not going back. I heard that young master wants to take root in Tianan, so we will go there. Young master, in an intelligence organization we can be regarded as the most important skeleton, the most important framework, and the development of intelligence will be very fast. If young master trusts us, we are willing to be your eyes and ears in Tianan from now on. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. The core skeleton of an intelligence organization, the top team of talents. He took a deep breath and laughed. I couldn't ask for more. Tianyi laughed and raised his glass. The Lord said that you will definitely like it. Who is your Lord? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Tianyi paused and shook his head. It's not convenient to reveal it now. When the right time comes, the Lord will appear in front of you. He hesitated and said softly, actually you have seen him. Well, you should have seen him. Li Tianlan glanced at him and his eyes were full of persistence. In the past he always felt that the so-called secrets often represented the past, and he only had a road ahead of him, so there was no need to deliberately pursue anything. But now, facts after facts told him that even the past was also extremely important. The affairs of the world were like a chess game. No one knew when and where a chess piece was placed, and there might be unexpected changes many years later in the future. I don't think there is anything I shouldn't know. Li Tianlan said seriously. Tianyi hesitated, quickly took his hand and wrote a word in his palm. That was a surname. But Li Tianlan instantly understood when he had seen the so-called Lord of Tianluo Temple. His expression became extremely interesting and he was a little stunned. Sim, this is a dead move. Tianyi smiled bitterly and said, young master, you'd better not use it unless it's a last resort. Li Tianlan pondered for a long time, then nodded and raised his glass. There's one more thing. Tianyi said slowly, young master, if we talk about combat effectiveness, we really can't make it to the public. If we follow you to Mount Dibbing, I'm afraid we will be a burden. The Qin family caught us and brought us to Mount Painting Tower. They must have made a backup of our identities. At this time it has been sent to Mount Dibbing. If you want our intelligence organization to run faster, we still need a lot of preparation. At least we need to prepare a new identity, which is very troublesome. Time is pressing. I think it's better to take them to Tianan first. Li Tianlan nodded and said softly, okay. Tianyi smiled and looked at Li Tianlan. Young master, it's right to take a temporary rest in Port Tongtian. Be careful when you go to Kanglan City. Li Tianlan glanced at him and asked, why? The Jiang family of Kanglan City holds the amber and is brave and fearless. Tianyi narrowed his eyes. The Jiang family is the most peculiar family in Beihai. In the past hundreds of years, there have been ups and downs. Among the 7 sword-holding families, the Jiang family's foundation can be said to be the worst. But in terms of strength, in recent decades the Jiang family is the strongest. The Tang family of the floating island and the Qin family of Tongtian have been firmly standing among the top wealthy families in the world for hundreds of years. But this is the comprehensive strength. If only in terms of combat effectiveness, the Jiang family can be said to be the first in recent decades. Li Tianlan held the glass and looked at Tianyi. After a moment of silence he asked, Invincible Realm? Among the 7 sword-holding families the Jiang family had the Invincible Realm. This was the only possibility. It should be gone now. Tianyi said, the Jiang family does have the Invincible Realm. But countless news have been verified by us in many ways. Because of his age the Invincible Realm should have fallen from his peak. But even so, if he really goes all out he may be able to reproduce the strength of his peak. Do you have any information? Li Tianlan asked. It's been a long time, Tianyi smiled bitterly. At present we can only be sure that he is still alive. As early as more than 20 years ago he has not fought. In terms of age he is more than 10 years older than Senior Li. When Senior Li had not entered the invincible realm, he had already stood on the divine list. Now he is nearly 100 years old. Young master, you should know what this means. Li Tianlan's eyes focused for a moment. He was 100 years old and had not fought for more than 20 years. As long as any warrior was alive, it was impossible for him to give up martial arts. He had not fought for so many years, undoubtedly to recover his strength. After so many years of recovery, how earth-shattering would it be when one move broke out? The Jiang family of Kanglin. Li Tianlan looked at the wind and rain outside the window and was silent for a long time. Then he slowly asked, "What's his name?" "Heaven Knife Deek." Tianyi said softly. Back then he was the adopted son of the Jiang clan's old master. According to old Li, in his era in terms of saber techniques he could be considered a true grandmaster of his generation. He was known as the Heaven Saber. Heaven Knife Deek. Li Tianlan looked at the wind and rain outside the window. The wind and rain suddenly became stronger. The dark clouds covered the gloomy sky. Li Tianlan smiled and said, "Let's wait for another day." His eyes were quiet and peaceful like the vast starry sky, like a bottomless abyss. From his eyes, Tianyi did not see any hesitation, mockery, contempt, or hesitation. What he saw was only confidence, extreme confidence and indomitable will. So he was not thinking about his trip to Kanglin Lake. The Jiang family of Kanglin Lake in Jiang family of Kanglin Lake. He saw it but he did not take it seriously. Then what was he waiting for? Li Tianlan looked at the wind and rain outside the window and sighed softly. Tianyi seemed to understand vaguely and said softly, "Young master, are you waiting for the people from the Wang family of Beihai? Do you think they will come?" Li Tianlan asked softly. Tianyi smiled bitterly and did not speak. "Did I not kill enough people?" Li Tianlan asked. Tianyi took a deep breath, poured himself a glass of wine and drank it up. He finally knew what the young master was waiting for. He was waiting for the people from the Wang family of Beihai, but he was not waiting for a battle. He was waiting for a negotiation. Tianguang Soul Lock Platform. Autumn water cleaving the world. Divine weapon break the sky. One sword split the mountain. All the way was stained with blood. Li Tianlan almost crushed the entire Beihai province with the power of the whole new era. He was unparalleled in the world, he was full of vigor and he was invincible. There was a Heaven Saber on Kanglin Lake. Heaven Saber de Quebec. But no one thought that an invincible realm expert who was nearly 100 years old and had declined could stop the heavenly son of the new era. As long as the Wang family of Beihai was not stupid, they naturally knew that they could not stop him. Li Tianlan was waiting for the Wang family of Beihai to compromise and bow their heads, for them to make concessions, and for them to take the initiative to negotiate. He waited calmly with the attitude of a winner. Waiting for another day was the opportunity he gave the entire Wang family of Beihai and the entire Mount Dibing. Such a negotiation was bound to be extremely harsh, but an opportunity was an opportunity after all. However, Tianyi looked at Li Tianlan with some doubts. His doubts turned into questions and he asked directly. "With the combat capability of young master today, you can completely sweep the entire Beihai province. Why wait for the so-called negotiation and give them the so-called opportunity? When young master comes to Mount Dibing, any so-called negotiation will be meaningless. And at that time the other party will have no objection." Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. Then he laughed. It was light but it contained countless emotions. "I'm thinking of someone," he said softly. The doorbell rang while he was talking. Li Tianlan frowned and looked at Tianyi. The bedroom door was pulled open. Huangfu Qiushui, in a fluttering white dress, walked out and opened the door of the suite. Her voice almost became a little excited and surprised in an instant. She seemed to have more confidence and shouted happily, "Sister." The sound of high-heeled shoes stepped across the floor and fell on the carpet silently. The person outside the door appeared in Li Tianlan's sight. Exquisite, noble, enchanting and reserved. So beautiful and so sad. Li Tianlan looked at her quietly. Some people really couldn't think. Once he thought she might appear in front of him in the next second. Li Tianlan suddenly wanted to pour himself a glass of wine. But the wine pot in front of him was empty. And the wind and rain outside the window were heavy. He quietly looked at the woman in front of him and took a deep breath. That was Wang Yuetong. Chapter 640. Not all reunions after a long separation were beautiful. Some meetings were crueler than a long separation. It was quiet in the hotel room. Wang Yuetong stood in the living room. In the dark environment, her eyes were as cool as water, and she looked at Li Tianlan quietly. Her exquisite short hair was soft and tidy, and her beautiful and enchanting facial features were slightly powdered. Her close-fitting white professional suit was clean and elegant, and her slim high-heeled shoes were stepping on the soft carpet. She stood very straight, and the former immaturity and liveliness seemed to disappear from her. After being nourished by Li Tianlan, experiencing in Tiannan, and representing the East Emperor Palace in Zhongzhou State, the former little princess gradually matured and became a little woman. She was charming, elegant, cold, reserved, and dignified. She looked at Li Tianlan quietly, and her eyes, which were as cool as water, became gentle and a little strange. At this moment, Li Tianlan's mind was full of scenes related to Wang Yuetong. The rich and varied scenes flickered with different emotions. From the first meeting to the present reunion after a long separation. In a short and seemingly long time he raised his hand. Wang Yuetong spoke. Her voice was quiet and soft. Her smile was impeccable and her beauty was almost dazzling. But her words were like a blade, cutting the distance cruelly. The two ends of the living room with her voice were instantly far away as if they were separated by the end of the world. Your Highness, she said softly, long time no see. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth moved. His figure was extremely stiff. In silence he clenched his hands and put them back on the table. Young master, I'll go back first. Tianyi sighed and stood up, his voice calm. Li Tianlan nodded. Tianyi walked out of the door. When passing by Wang Yuetong she glanced at Huangfu Qiushui, who was surprised at first but now was at a loss. Huangfu Qiushui blinked, quietly stepped back for a distance, and then quietly slipped back into the bedroom. In the quiet and almost suffocating environment, Li Tianlan finally moved. He pulled out the chair beside him and said hoarsely, "Sit down." Wang Yuetong walked over gently. Her every move carried a kind of perfection cultivated from childhood to adulthood. She had a myriad of manners as if she was born reserved and noble. Li Tianlan looked at her quietly and whispered, "When did you come to Beihai?" "Your Highness is wrong." Wang Yuetong did not sit next to Li Tianlan but opposite him. She smiled slightly but her eyes were trembling. "Beihai is my home. I came here to go home. I came back last night." "Yeah, go home," Li Tianlan muttered to himself. "Speak." Wang Yuetong looked at him tenderly and strangely. Li Tianlan lit a cigarette. In the lingering smoke his silence seemed endless. "State your conditions." Wang Yuetong said softly, "You've stayed here for one night, which proves that we can negotiate. We'd like to hear your conditions." "Conditions?" Li Tianlan glanced at her. His voice was calm as well. The calmness of both sides fused together and became complicated. It turned into absolute love and reluctance. In the end, the silence turned into an emotion called heartlessness. "Beihai might be able to give you the explanation you want," Wang Yuetong said quietly. Li Tianlan laughed at himself. Of course he had conditions. But he had never thought that this condition would be stated in front of Wang Yuetong. The cigarette slowly burned out. The messy sound of wind and rain filled the world. The chill of early autumn in Beihai seemed to permeate through the window. It was so cold that it made people desperate. Li Tianlan slowly put out the cigarette in the ashtray. "Hand over all the heads of the Devil Troop and the remaining 6 famous swords of Beihai Province. The Beihai Corps must publicly apologize to the Snowdance Corps." He still had many conditions. But these were the 3 most important ones. Wang Yuetong listened quietly. Her eyes became softer and softer, faintly shining. "Is there no other way?" She looked at Li Tianlan and asked softly. Li Tianlan did not hesitate. He shook his head slowly, very slowly but very firmly. "No. Beihai will not agree to your conditions. This is beyond the bottom line of our compromise." Wang Yuetong's voice calmed down. It was so calm that there was no indifference or gentleness. Li Tianlan nodded and said, The negotiation was light and breezy. The interaction was light and breezy. The beginning was light and breezy. The end was light and breezy. Everything was over. including feelings, entanglements and negotiations. Wang Yuetong stood up. She didn't fight for anything and didn't want to say anything more. Li Tianlan made a condition. Wang Yuetong refused. So be it. I'm leaving, she said softly. Li Tianlan reached out his hand. Wang Yuetong's delicate body, which was about to turn around, suddenly trembled. In silence, her delicate palm was held by Li Tianlan's hand very tightly. Wang Yuetong did not turn around. Li Tianlan did not speak. Wang Yuetong laughed with a trembling breath. All her perseverance seemed to collapse in an instant when she felt Li Tianlan's temperature. Tears slowly flowed down. Her palms slowly exerted force. She once again thought of the late spring more than 3 years ago, when people came and went in the square of the Sky Academy. That calm and fateful encounter. It seemed that from that time on she had been approaching him, walking to his side and entering his world. He rejected and resisted again and again. He was incomparably cold and even indifferent. Wang Yuetong did not think about anything. She was really sure that she had fallen in love with this man. So, regardless of position, opposition, difficulties and injuries, she was so brave that she threw herself at him again and again. Even if she was covered with cuts and bruises, she did not turn back. And now, in the rainy port of Tongtian, when the chill of early autumn swept Beihai, in front of Li Tianlan for the first time, she took the initiative to turn around and leave. Li Tianlan took her hand. Tears seemed to be endless. It was not until this moment that Wang Yuetong realized that when she was asked to stay, the pain in her heart would be more painful than when she took the initiative to approach him. The silence behind her continued as if it would not change for thousands of years, as Li Tianlan held her hand and did not let go. His grip was so strong that it seemed to be able to resist everything. Wang Yuetong bit her lip tightly and raised the other hand to wipe her tears. Her voice was extremely calm. Your Highness, please behave yourself. You are mine. Li Tianlan's voice sounded behind her, hoarse and firm. You belong to me. You are mine. Wang Yuetong cried silently and laughed silently. Li Tianlan did not say that he loved her. This man, even when he asked her to stay at the last moment, was still so overbearing. He said that she belonged to him and only him. Her palm gradually exerted force as if she wanted to pull out of Li Tianlan's hand. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. I belong to Beihai. Her voice trembled slightly. It had been nearly 2 months. She was in Tianan. He was in Eastern Europe. There was no conflict between them, no quarrel and no phone call between them. Before leaving, she still lay in his arms and called him a good husband and a good brother. When they met again, she called him Your Highness. She belonged to Li Tianlan, or in other words, belonged to him. But now she belonged to Beihai. Your Highness, Wang Yuetong said softly, let's break up. You are mine. Li Tianlan raised his voice abruptly and pulled Wang Yuetong into his arms with a sudden force of his palm. The familiar fragrance came to his face. Li Tianlan's face was a little ferocious. He pressed Wang Yuetong's short hair and directly covered her beautiful lips with his mouth. Wang Yuetong struggled hard. She kept patting Li Tianlan's back with one hand, and held Li Tianlan's neck tightly with the other hand. The soft lilac catered to his wildness, and her white teeth bit Li Tianlan's lips. Tears silently flowed down her cheeks. Li Tianlan's lips were bitten until they bled. The blood and tears mixed together and it was salty. At some point the two had been tightly hugging each other, and all the forced pretense of modesty was completely shattered. The small hand that patted Li Tianlan's back hooked Li Tianlan's neck. Her beautiful face gradually flushed, and in the dark hall, it was the most gorgeous color. Time passed in the blink of an eye. Wang Yuetong broke away from Li Tianlan. She sat on Li Tianlan's lap. After a long and suffocating kiss, her breath was disordered, and she subconsciously bit Li Tianlan's neck gently. Li Tianlan held her tighter and tighter. I belong to Beihai, fool. In the rapid breathing she cried out. I'm the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai, the little princess on Mount Dibing. I've lived there since I was a child. Do you know? I remember every palace on Mount Dibing and everyone in the Wang family of Beihai. I've been on the stage of Formidable Person, and I remember nearly 1,000 names on the stone of Formidable Person. I remember their stories. It's the holy land of the Wang family of Beihai, the holy land of the 8 influential families in Beihai province, and also the holy land in my heart. Devil Troop, do you know who they are? They are my elders and the elders of everyone in the 8 influential families. You want to go on the stage of formidable person and you want to kill the devil troupe. I won't agree. How can I agree? I'd rather you kill me than agree, you fool. She held Li Tianlan and cried loudly. Her excitement gradually became low, but Li Tianlan just held her tightly and said nothing. I should have thought of this day, but no matter how I prepared, I couldn't bear to do it, Wang Yuetong whispered. She raised her beautiful eyes, which were red and watery from crying. Her delicate body sat on Li Tianlan's lap and kept trembling. She pursed her red lips and gritted her white teeth. She seemed to have exhausted all her strength. Li Tianlan. She formally called Li Tianlan's name. Let's break up. She got down from Li Tianlan's lap and resolutely broke free from Li Tianlan's arms. At that moment the whole world seemed to have entered a cold winter. It was a world of ice and snow without any warmth. She tried to stand up straight and tidied up her somewhat wrinkled clothes. I'll wait for you on Mount Dibbing, waiting for you to kill me. Her whole soul seemed to suddenly tremble for a moment. Li Tianlan held Wang Yuetong's hand again. He stood up. Wang Yuetong's body trembled and she couldn't help throwing herself into Li Tianlan's arms. She cried and said, "Let me go. Don't hold me anymore. Let me go." Li Tianlan stood there expressionlessly, letting Wang Yuetong beat his chest with her other hand. He took her hand and pulled her body closer and closer. Wang Yuetong seemed to be tired. She grabbed Li Tianlan's collar with her tender white hand and sobbed. Li Tianlan just looked at her without saying a word. Wang Yuetong, who was mentally and physically exhausted, leaned on Li Tianlan and greedily sniffed his scent. She slowly put down her hand that was grabbing Li Tianlan's collar and hugged his waist tightly. The sky was still gloomy. It was raging. In the dark environment of the room, Wang Yuetong buried her small face in Li Tianlan's arms. She sobbed and whispered, "I want it." The 3 simple words were like a wildfire, almost burning all of Li Tianlan's reason in an instant. Without any hesitation he bent down, picked up Wang Yuetong and put her on the tea table in front of him. Wang Yuetong shook her head desperately and pointed to the bedroom. Li Tianlan's eyes were red. He rushed over with her in his arms as if he were holding a light doll. The bedroom door was violently kicked open by him. The white sheets, the white walls, the white curtains and the white furniture were clean. She sat on the bed in a daze and her white dress was also clean. Huangfu Qiushui, who was startled, suddenly stood up and stared blankly at Li Tianlan and Wang Yuetong, a little confused. No one paid attention to Huangfu Qiushui. At this moment, Li Tianlan only had eyes for Wang Yuetong. Wang Yuetong only had eyes for Li Tianlan. The cold early autumn was blooming with warm spring colors, bright and beautiful. The wind and rain beat the entire Tongtian port. Clear water flowed all over the quiet valley. There were orioles in the valley, and their moving songs surrounded the entire world. They were soft and gentle, crisp and pleasing to the ear. The dreamlike mountains and rivers were changing shape under the supreme will, and the soft sky light emitted an intoxicating white luster. Time passed by. They lingered on. There was no grudge, no position. This was a fairyland, a paradise. The sky was always gloomy in the morning or at noon. The wind and rain were still falling. Wang Yuetong sat in front of the dresser beside the bed and tidied up her short hair. Her mood completely calmed down. She was no longer wild and delicate. She became calm, gentle, reserved, and noble. "I'm leaving." Her crisp voice, like that of a oriole, was slightly hoarse. Li Tianlan raised his hand as if he wanted to grasp something. In silence he slowly put down his raised hand. There seemed to be a lingering, ambiguous atmosphere in the air. Wang Yuetong tidied up her clothes and looked at the corner. Her blushing face flashed a touch of unnaturalness. She forced herself to calm down and said, "Let's go together?" Huangfu Qiushui curled up in the corner. Her cold and charming face was as red as blood. Her slender legs were closed together, trembling slightly. Her disordered breath caused her plump chest to rise and fall gently. She seemed to be completely immersed in her own world. Hearing Wang Yuetong's voice, she slowly raised her head and looked at Wang Yuetong. Her hazy and charming eyes were full of an incredible look. Wang Yuetong coughed and walked to Huangfu Qiushui in high heels. Her slender heels stepped on the carpet, light and soft as if she were walking in the clouds. She reached out to Huangfu Qiushui. Huangfu Qiushui shook her head, her face getting redder. Her legs seemed to be softer and weaker than Wang Yuetong's without any strength. No one knew what this 17-year-old martial god had experienced this morning. Wang Yu, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Wang Yuetong seemed to be ashamed, her eyes wandering. For the first time, there was a touch of embarrassment in Li Tianlan's eyes. He wanted a suite with more than one bedroom. But he and Wang Yuetong broke into Huangfu Qiushui's bedroom. There was no reason. Because it was close. Just because it was close and convenient enough. He and Wang Yuetong were in this almost pure white room. No one noticed Huangfu Qiushui, who was also in a white dress. What was even more bizarre was that Huangfu Qiushui had not left. She sat in the corner and witnessed everything from beginning to end. He silently lit a cigarette, took a deep breath, looked at Huangfu Qiushui and said lightly, "You go." Huangfu Qiushui looked at Li Tianlan in a daze. Her eyes were dazed and blurred. The previous coldness had completely disappeared, and her eyes were full of strange emotions. Not long ago in this room, she saw with her own eyes Li Tianlan's power in another field. In that state, Li Tianlan was completely like a lion, while Sister Yuetong's fair and tender body was like a little lamb that had no ability to resist. The little lamb was constantly being bitten by the lion, struggling, resisting, begging for mercy and fawning. No matter what she did, she could not resist the lion's power. The most real scenes hit her heart without any concealment. Somehow, at that moment, Huangfu Qiushui's mind was filled with the image of Li Tianlan splitting the mountain with a sword of the 13-story building level. This man, she could not describe her inner feelings at all. At some point she felt that she had become Sister Yuetong, the little lamb, trembling under the lion's claws and teeth, delicate and pitiful. She slowly lowered her head. Her legs were still weak. Her face flushed, she shook her head and whispered, I'll go back by myself. I want to take a bath. Wang Yuetong blushed slightly and turned to look at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the drifting smoke in front of him. There would be no more accidents. Out of this door what should go would go, and what should move forward would continue to move forward. Wang Yuetong went into the bathroom to wash her face and whispered, I'm leaving. Li Tianlan stood up and saw Wang Yuetong out of the suite and into the elevator. In the indescribable silence, the two stood close to each other. They used to be intimate. Just now they were also intimate. But at this moment the extremely close distance was like a chasm, completely separating the two. It was still raining in the hotel. The hotel owner stood respectfully in the hall for a long time. Seeing Wang Yuetong come out, he trotted to the front desk and took an umbrella. It seemed that he wanted to hold the umbrella for Wang Yuetong himself. Wang Yuetong shook her head, reached out to take the umbrella and said thank you. In fact, there was no need for an umbrella at all. In the falling wind and rain, in front of the gate of the hotel, a pure black Rolls-Royce was quietly parked there, and 2 rows of bodyguards in black stood there quietly. Like 2 rows of motionless statues, they spread into the rain. Wang Yuetong stood in front of the door, holding the umbrella, quietly watching the wind and rain outside the window. No matter how sweet the distance was, it was always separation. Li Tianlan was still silent. I love Beihai. Wang Yuetong whispered. She turned to look at Li Tianlan, and there seemed to be thousands of words in her blurred and charming eyes. Li Tianlan looked at her without saying a word. Just like I love you. The two stood face to face and they could feel each other's breath. Wang Yuetong clenched her hands into small fists. She looked at Li Tianlan and seemed to be waiting for something. Li Tianlan did nothing but looked at her seriously. Will you go to Mount Dibing? Wang Yuetong looked at him deeply as if she wanted to carve Li Tianlan into her eyes. Yes. Li Tianlan's voice was dry, but there was no hesitation. Okay. Wang Yuetong laughed. I'll wait for you on the mountain. She reached out and touched Li Tianlan's face. I love this place and I have something I want to hold on to just like you. Your Highness, I believe that you will go to Mount Dibing and I believe that you will see me. If we meet again we will be enemies. She looked at Li Tianlan, and her affectionate eyes seemed to contain the whole Beihai. So, don't be merciful. Either you kill me or I kill you. Li Tianlan closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Is there anything you want to say to me? Wang Yuetong asked softly. There was only expectation in her eyes. Li Tianlan glanced at her. After a long and short glance, he shook his head. Wang Yuetong said yes. Her palm left Li Tianlan's face. Her eyes became reserved again. She turned around and walked to the Rolls-Royce. The door was slowly opened. Wang Yuetong stood in front of the door and slowly looked back. In her sight, Li Tianlan stood there expressionless and frighteningly quiet. Wang Yuetong walked into the car. The Rolls-Royce started slowly. When the huge motorcade was about to leave the hotel, Wang Yuetong suddenly said, "Stop the car." The car stopped and the door was opened. Wang Yuetong pushed the door hard and looked back at the hotel again through the wind and rain. Li Tianlan was still standing in front of the hotel. He didn't move, but he didn't ask her to stay. Under the wind and rain, Wang Yuetong's eyes almost turned red from crying. As if she had no reluctance to leave, she turned around and got in the car. The motorcade left in a mighty manner and didn't stop. Li Tianlan watched all this quietly until Tianyi came over again and stood beside him. "Young master." His voice was hesitant. "I think if you don't let her go in the end, she will stay." After a pause, his voice became clearer. "Even if she has to bear everything." Because in the last parting, her silence and the 2 times she looked back seemed to be waiting for something. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time before he whispered, "I know." He knew, but he couldn't bear to. He could not bear to let her carry all the things that she should not carry. Just like Wang Yuetong, she also knew that as long as she opened her mouth, Li Tianlan might also stop at Port Tongtian and return to Zhongzhou state with all his grievances. But she couldn't bear to. Therefore he remained silent and did not persuade her to stay. She remained silent and did not ask him to turn back. It was all because he couldn't bear to. She stayed in the North Sea. He is God's soldier's mountain. It was because of their respective standpoints, but it was obvious that neither side wanted the other to bear any burden or suffer any grievances. Therefore they respected each other's choice to the greatest extent. Even if such a choice was heartbreaking. Li Tianlan did not blame Wang Yuetong. She was still his woman. Wang Yuetong did not blame Li Tianlan. He was still her man. The wind and rain fell. The cold autumn air was like a knife, bringing with it the cruelest things in the world, mercilessly cutting apart the most tender moments. He slowly turned around. He did not blame the world for not being beautiful. He could only blame the vicissitudes of life. End of chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 641. The rain was getting heavier and heavier, and the world seemed to shrink in the wind and rain. As his field of vision stretched forward, the hazy rain and mist slowly spread, and only the scene a few meters in front of him was still clear. The black Rolls-Royce had gradually disappeared in the wind and rain. Li Tianlan stood in front of the hotel and was silent for a long time. The faint light from the sky gradually dimmed. The light in front of the hotel lit up. After a day of heavy rain, his bare feet stepped on the ground and endless chill enveloped him. He stood silently as if he had become a statue. The wind at night was getting stronger. After standing for a whole afternoon, Li Tianlan finally turned around and walked back to the hotel. The light in the room was still off. In the dark environment, Huangfu Qiushui sat quietly in the position where Li Tianlan had sat in the morning, looking out the window at the night rain. She looked extremely focused. She seemed to be in a trance, and the sound of Li Tianlan coming in was completely ignored by her. Li Tianlan ignored her. He took 2 wine bottles from the wine cabinet, walked over and slowly sat opposite Huangfu Qiushui. The sound of the wine bottles hitting the crystal table woke Huangfu Qiushui up. She subconsciously bounced up from her seat and opened her mouth. Li Tianlan looked up at her. Darkness surrounded her white dress. In the light of the night, her skin was so white and tender that it almost glowed. Her long eyelashes blinked, and a pair of infinitely charming eyes looked at Li Tianlan, unusually bright. Her mouth was small, and the corners of her beautiful lips gently opened and closed. There was endless charm in the luster. Li Tianlan withdrew his gaze, poured himself a glass of wine and drank it up. There were no dishes to go with the wine. In the cold autumn night he was accompanied by a stunning beauty and a violent wind and rain. The sound of rain roared through the whole city. The lightning tore the night sky and the vast white flashed for a moment. Li Tianlan, who was leaning against the chair, was illuminated by the pale lightning. He held a wine glass in one hand and looked out of the window, his face calm and almost numb. Huangfu Qiushui's heart seemed to tremble. The emotion at that moment turned into a kind of power called impulse. She gently took 2 steps forward, pulled out the chair beside Li Tianlan and sat beside him. Very, very close. Her voice trembled slightly. I'll drink with you. Li Tianlong looked at Huangfu Qiushui quietly. The distance between the two of them was too close. He could clearly feel the fragrance on the girl's body and her slightly shaky breathing. He could even hear the girl's intense heartbeat. Huangfu Qiushui looked at Li Tianlong nervously. She didn't know why she did it. But at this moment she just wanted to do it. Li Tianlong did not let go of the bottle. He looked at Huangfu Qiushui expressionlessly and raised his hand to point to the opposite side. His silent movement brought with it an invisible force. Huangfu Qiushui's body stiffened for a moment, and a faint grievance drowned her like a tide. She stood up in a daze and sat in the seat furthest away from him as Li Tianlong pointed at. Li Tianlong continued drinking. The bottle was empty. Li Tianlong waved his hands. The sword qi blew up the wine cabinet. Bottles of wine that had been kept in the hotel for a long time flew over, and then disappeared one after another. Li Tianlong's eyes grew brighter and brighter, and he drank faster and faster, just like the heavy rain outside the window that blocked the light. The light in the room grew darker and it was silent. Huangfu Qiushui sat opposite him and watched him drink quietly. She was silent for a long time before she whispered, "You love Sister Yuetong very much, don't you?" Li Tianlong looked at her quietly. The 17-year-old girl was persistent and focused when she was serious and even a little pious. Li Tianlong laughed. He didn't know why he laughed, but he just wanted to laugh. "I don't know." His voice had become hoarse from drinking too much, but his eyes still maintained absolute rationality and calmness. He didn't know. That was his answer. He wasn't sure whether he loved Wang Yuetong or not, just like he wasn't sure whether he loved Dongqing Rushi or not. But they were both his women. The women he cherished most. Li Tianlong looked at the north in a trance. The rain swept from the south all the way to the north, covering the entire Beihai. It was still late at night in the north. In the heavy rain late at night, a row of motorcades was driving on the road to Mount Dibing. He didn't know what the little woman sitting in the back of the car was feeling. Was it missing? Was it sadness? Was it determination? Or was it entanglement? Li Tianlong didn't want to think about it, but he couldn't let it go. Not because he loved her or not, but because he let her down. He knew that he had let this woman down after all. He had let her down for her devotion and her courage, just like he had let Dongqing Rushi down. Fishable. They were all his women. In this dark night someone was heading north, walking in the direction he was about to pass, but they were getting farther and farther away from him. Someone was still lying in bed and he didn't know if he could wake up in this life. Only Qin Weibai was still in Yuzhou, still waiting for him to go back. He hadn't let her down. Li Tianlong threw away the wine glass, picked up the bottle and poured a mouthful of wine into his mouth. The wine flowed down his collar. There was a wildfire burning in his stomach that couldn't be extinguished. The more it burned, the more Li Tianlong wanted to drink. He didn't want to let anyone down. But it was true. It was true. Dongqing Rushi was sleeping and Wang Yuetong was far away. The two of them seemed to have an invisible weight that was pulling his life in another direction. "In fact, you don't have to do this." Huangfu Qiushui looked at Li Tianlong and said cautiously, "You have proved your strength. I think if you are willing to be with Sister Yuetong, the teacher will not disagree and..." She looked at Li Tianlong as if she was choosing her words. Li Tianlong looked at her. His eyes were extremely cold. "What do you know? This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." Huangfu Qiushui bit her lip and stopped talking. Li Tianlong leaned back in the chair and waved his hand to turn on the light in the living room. The light dispelled all the darkness. The soft light flowed through the hall and fell into Li Tianlong's eyes, twisting in trance. Li Tianlong held the wine bottle in his hand tightly and stopped talking. Huangfu Qiushui observed him carefully. Her face was slightly red, but she looked at him attentively and carefully, almost gazing. Her eyes fell on Li Tianlong's bare feet. Li Tianlong had been barefooted since he went up the painting mountain until now. Huangfu Qiushui hesitated and walked into the bathroom. After a while she came out with a foot basin with a massage function. The clear water swayed in the basin, reflecting her cold and beautiful face, which was a little blurry. Li Tianlong looked at the soft light in the living room motionlessly, as if looking up at the starry sky. Huangfu Qiushui squatted down in front of Li Tianlong. The hem of the white dress fell on the carpet, layer upon layer like a blooming white flower. Huangfu Qiushui looked at the tools in front of her and Li Tianlong's feet. She bit her lip gently and her eyes flashed with complicated brilliance. "Can you give Qiushui back to me?" she asked in a low voice. Her voice was so soft that she didn't even hear it clearly. Li Tianlan didn't respond. Huangfu Qiushui seemed to find an excuse for herself. Her tender white hands stretched out trembling. She held Li Tianlan's feet, put them in the basin in front of her and carefully washed them. Li Tianlan lowered his head and looked at Huangfu Qiushui quietly. At this moment he suddenly thought of Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai had also washed his feet. Her gentleness surrounded Li Tianlan little by little, and even made him take everything for granted. But Huangfu Qiushui was different. Qin Weibai was a goddess. But she was also a woman who belonged to him. And Huangfu Qiushui, her tender white palms moved gently in the water. On her snow-white wrist, a green jade bracelet shone softly in the water. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. He didn't have to think to know that countless people in the whole of Beihai dreamed of holding this pair of noble and white hands and clasping fingers with her. But now these hands were gently kneading his feet, carefully trying to please him. It was so lowly. Li Tianlan looked at her quietly. "Do you know the Jiang family?" he asked suddenly. Huangfu Qiushui shook her head reflexively. Her hands didn't stop moving. After a while she whispered, "Is it the heaven saber?" Li Tianlan said, indifferently. Huangfu Qiushui hesitated and struggled but she couldn't help it. She shook her head but said honestly, "I've seen Grandpa Heaven Saber." At his peak, Grandpa Heaven Saber once entered the top 5 on the divine list. "I haven't seen his saber, but I heard from my teacher that his saber is very domineering. In recent decades he is the best saber user." "Can I kill him?" Li Tianlan asked. The Heaven Saber Emperor had sealed his saber for more than 20 years and had been recuperating for more than 20 years. He didn't expect to hear any information from Huangfu Qiushui, so he asked casually. Huangfu Qiushui lowered her head and served Li Tianlan's feet. She whispered, "I don't recommend you go to Kanglan Lake." Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and didn't speak. He casually raised his foot and stepped on Huangfu Qiushui's skirt. Huangfu Qiushui's delicate body trembled slightly. She lowered her head, and there was no anger in her infinitely charming and beautiful eyes. Instead they became softer. She hesitated, slightly lifted her skirt, wrapped Li Tianlan's feet and gently wiped them. At that moment, Li Tianlan saw a piece of snow-white and smooth calf. "First time washing someone's feet?" Li Tianlan asked carelessly. Huangfu Qiushui's small hands shook. She raised her head and looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. She whispered, "Yes." Her hands could be said to be the noblest hands in Beihai province. She was the student of summer solstice, the inviolable goddess in the eyes of countless peers in Beihai, the young martial god of the Huangfu family, and the future sword-bearer of Qiushui. How could such a pair of hands be used to wash a man's feet? It was a complete blasphemy. Li Tianlan laughed. He breathed out the smell of alcohol, but his eyes were extremely cold and playful. He lifted his feet along the soft hem of her dress, lifted Huangfu Qiushui's chin and touched her face with his toes. Her face was extremely soft and delicate, almost fragile. "I'm so honored." His feet rubbed Huangfu Qiushui's face. He said lightly, "Why?" "I want Qiushui to give me back." Huangfu Qiushui's breathing became completely chaotic. Li Tianlan's feet slid gently on her face. This was a scene that could completely make all the teenagers in Beihai province lose their minds. Huangfu Qiushui's eyes were a little humiliated. Her face was red, but she looked into Li Tianlan's eyes bravely. Her eyes were cold with humiliation and complexity, but also entangled with an incomparably clear desire. She did not know why she was like this. He was not Wang Yuetong. So Huangfu Qiushui could be sure that she did not fall in love with Li Tianlan. But what she had been exposed to the most in her life was swordsmanship. The most perfect swordsmanship had an almost fatal attraction in her eyes. Li Tianlan was young enough, strong enough and strong enough. He broke into her world with the most perfect posture and took away Qiushui, which was equivalent to taking away everything from her. On the Lingtai Mountain she looked at the Tianguang Spirit Lock platform. On the Painting Lu Mountain she watched him split the mountain with a sword and Qiushui cut the world. Strong, domineering and indifferent. Invincible and invincible. He was the heavenly son and the perfect figure that Huangfu Qiushui had dreamed of countless times. This had nothing to do with love. It was just the purest admiration, or it could be said to be infatuation. Countless feelings. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Her emotions had been rising and falling in her heart. She still remembered that Li Tianlan was an enemy, but she also remembered that she saw Li Tianlan as perfect. And then, just today, this morning in the bedroom next to this suite, her favorite sister was thrown on the bed by him, and the two of them were entangled with each other, completely ignoring her existence. That was a scene that Huangfu Qiushui had never imagined. Li Tianlan was like the strongest lion, gnawing on the white sheep under him, the prey that the conqueror could see. She heard Wang Yuetong screaming, begging for mercy, provoking and then conquering again and again, crazy and happy. Those scenes almost completely destroyed Huangfu Qiushui's reason. For the whole day she was in a trance. She thought of Li Tianlan's sword light and Li Tianlan's almost barbaric biting. The scenes kept changing. It turned out that even enemies could hug together and fight on another battlefield. She didn't love Li Tianlan, but at this moment his feet were mercilessly desecrating her face. The desire in her heart suddenly magnified 1,000 times. She thought of the scenes she saw and her body seemed to be on fire. She really hoped that she was Li Tianlan at that time and was conquered by him again and again, tonight, now or anything else. She looked at Li Tianlan's eyes intently. At this time, Li Tianlan could do anything to her. She might resist, but she would not refuse. Because of desire. She longed for his strength to destroy everything about her, to make her fall once or for a lifetime. Li Tianlan played with her face. After a long time he slowly put down his feet and said lightly, "I'm not interested in little girls." He pointed to the tools on the ground. Huangfu Qiushui bit her lip hard, slowly picked up the basin and walked into the bathroom. She hid in the bathroom for a long time, washed her face with cold water and slowly walked out. All the wine bottles on the table were empty. Li Tianlan sat in the chair and slowly fell asleep. Huangfu Qiushui hesitated to wake him up, but stood behind him. "Can you give Qiushui back to me?" she murmured something under her breath. Li Tianlan didn't wake up. Huangfu Qiushui seemed to have put down the burden and reached out to gently knead Li Tianlan's shoulder. The messy wind and rain gradually subsided. Huangfu Qiushui turned off the light. In the dark environment, the sound of rain occupied the whole world. Huangfu Qiushui slowly kneaded Li Tianlan's shoulder, seriously as if she was practicing swordsmanship. A little sword intent rose and fell with Li Tianlan's breathing. He seemed to be sleeping but also meditating. The perfect sword intent hovered around his body almost all the time. In this way Li Tianlan was getting stronger almost all the time. Huangfu Qiushui felt the sword light. She was shocked, but more than that she couldn't extricate herself. She didn't tell Li Tianlan that from the very beginning she could understand the 13 floors, which represented the supreme achievement of the Chosen One. Although she couldn't understand all of the sword formation. But if he could understand it, he could understand it. From darkness to dawn. The sky broke and the morning sun was slightly cold. Nearly 200 elites belonging to Tianluo gathered in Tianyi. He walked into the room and saw Huangfu Qiushui, who was kneading Li Tianlan's shoulder. He smiled and gestured for her to leave. Huangfu Qiushui hesitated and pointed at Li Tianlan. Tianyi shook his head with a smile and walked out quietly. It was still raining. It was getting brighter and brighter. Li Tianlan, who had slept all night, opened his eyes. The gentle kneading on his shoulder continued, and the fragrance of the girl was extremely gentle. Li Tianlan was silent for a while, reached out and patted the small hand on his shoulder and said flatly, "Qiushui won't return it to you." Huangfu Qiushui said, "Oh," obediently, but her hands didn't stop. She just whispered, "They all left an hour ago." Li Tianlan froze, looking at the wind and rain outside the window. After a moment of silence he said, His voice was calm. And his eyes were calm. Everything yesterday seemed to be completely in the past. In front of him was a new day in Beihai. His journey would eventually continue. "Let's trigger." His eyes looked to the north. That was the direction of Kanglan City. Kanglan Lake in Kanglan City. The Jiang family of Beihai held the amber, loyal and brave. The dark clouds drifted north with the wind. Li Tianlan's breath grew quieter. "You," Huangfu Qiushui asked in a low voice, "what are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about the past," Li Tianlan said softly. "The past?" Huangfu Qiushui blinked her eyes in confusion. There is no past. Li Tianlan said slowly. His past was not good. Dongqing Rushi belonged to the past and now she was lying in bed. The master of Samsara Palace belonged to the past, but now she had fallen. Situde Songyue and Tribulation also belonged to the past, but now they were all seriously injured. The Li family also belonged to the past, but now they were all in the purgatory of heaven capital. Wang Yuetong belonged to the past, but in yesterday's silence, they had gradually drifted away. There was no past and there was no meaning. I'm thinking about the future. Li Tianlan said calmly. Without the past he stood in the present and could only think about the future. Are you thinking about His Majesty Sword Emperor? Huangfu Qiushui whispered. If His Majesty returns to Beihai and knows what you have done, then, whether he is in Beihai or not, or whether he returns to Beihai when he comes back, he should know. Li Tianlan said softly. The Li family is still the Li family. Li Tianlan is still Li Tianlan. This was his future, calm and fearless. In Huangfu Qiushui's strange silence he slowly stood up. Let's go. The wind passed Beihai and the clouds passed Kanglan. Forget the past, not afraid of the future. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading.